We begin in the Urandi Empire, specifically in the Lanster fief, where a school teacher is telling the children they'll be learning all about mages today. She explains that meditation is key, requiring intense concentration, and assures them that anyone can master it. Now, among these children, we notice one boy who looks a little older than the rest. He's silently wondering if that's actually true. His name is Ling Lanster. Ling's feeling pretty bummed out because it's already been 8 years since he first started preschool. Some kids his age have already become independent mages, totally capable of using magic. Yet he still can't even meditate, let alone cast a spell. He looks at his hand, thinking that if he ever wants to discover the truth about what happened that year, he absolutely needs to become a sage-level mage. Suddenly, something slaps him right in the face. The kids rush over, apologizing profusely, saying they got carried away while practicing magic and weren't paying attention. One child asks Ling, "Why didn't you just use a shield to block it?" Another kid scolds the first, saying, "What are you talking about? Our young master hasn't even graduated from preschool, unfortunately. How could he use any magic at all?" The kid who cast the spell looks confused, asking, "Wait, if the Lord's magic is so powerful, why is Ling still just a beginner?" Another kid pipes up, saying it's because the young master is actually an orphan, adopted by the Lord. They start whispering amongst themselves, questioning whether a nameless street boy like him is even worthy of becoming the Lord's heir. As they talk, our protagonist Ling starts to feel totally offended. Not graduating preschool, being an orphan, and being called a street boy is hitting hard. The children go back to playing, and Ling thinks, "Wow, those little brats really know how to stab a person right in the heart." Suddenly, a loud, frightening, and commanding voice booms out, asking one of the boys just what he was babbling about. The boy immediately starts crying and can barely get a word out. However, Ling steps in and asks Carl to lower his sword. The knight looks confused and glances at Ling, which gives the children the perfect chance to bolt. Carl insists to the young master that he absolutely must let him punish those children severely. Ling stands up and says that even if that's true, Carl can't use such brutal methods. He questions if the sword the king granted him was really meant to be drawn against commoners. Carl is left speechless, then bows deeply, apologizing and promising he won't do anything foolish again. Ling says it's fine and quickly changes the subject, asking why Carl showed up in the first place. The knight nearly shouts, realizing he almost forgot the reason he came. He tells Ling that he's received a letter from Oliver and needs to return right away to check it. Ling is surprised. Oliver is the one who helped him hide his real name back when his father had that accident. Oliver is essentially the benefactor who's kept him hidden all this time. Ling heads back to the palace. He thinks about how Oliver knew he couldn't sense magic and has been trying every way possible to help him awaken it. Ling happily jumps off the carriage, sure that Oliver must have finally discovered something useful this time. He enters the estate and greets his father, announcing that he's back. The man turns and tells Ling to hurry up and go study. This man is actually the elder brother of Ling's mother. His name is Blaine Lanster. Blaine says he has Oliver's message right there and wants to hear it along with Ling. Ling thinks that technically he should call Blaine uncle, but to keep his true identity a secret, they have to pretend to be father and adopted son to the outside world. Blaine uses a bit of magic, asking a small statue in the room to read the contents of the letter aloud. The statue's eyes start to glow, and it repeats the letter word for word. The statue says, "Greetings, Duke Blaine. I was wandering and stumbled upon a rather peculiar magic book. Perhaps this item will help Ling finally awaken his magic." Suddenly, a book actually flies out of the statue and right into our protagonist's hands. Ling is stunned to see the book is made of animal bones, nodding that the material is extremely peculiar. However, even holding the book, he looks down, feeling disheartened, realizing so many years have passed and he still can't awaken his true magic, no matter how hard he tries. He looks at the bone book, wondering if this time he'll actually succeed. Seeing his struggle, Blaine tries to comfort him, saying if he feels too tired, he shouldn't push himself, since not everyone can be a mage, let alone a sage-level one. The Duke points out that Ling could always just live as Ling Lanster if he wanted, because it was Zoe who left him in the first place. So why, he asks, should Ling carry this heavy burden for him and force himself into becoming a mage? Our protagonist bows his head and sincerely thanks his uncle for the incredibly kind words. However, he emphasizes that, as his uncle already knows, his father's supposed betrayal isn't a simple matter at all. He remembers that before, if Ling was even 5 minutes late coming home, his father would panic, becoming extremely anxious and flying all over the city searching for him. Now though, his father is trapped deep within the dragon territory, and sadly, they don't even know if he's still alive. Ling lifts his head smiling and insists that as a true son, he absolutely can't just ignore that. Time passes quickly and night falls over the estate. Ling heads to his room and lies down on his bed. He looks at the mysterious book and says he knows his uncle is trying to do this for his own good. But he declares, as long as there's even a single chance to find his father, he simply won't give up. If there's a 1% chance, he'll have 99% faith. Ling starts thinking that even with all that determination, he remembers his father rarely actually came home. He flashes back to when he was a child, hearing his mother say that his father had brought him brand new toys. He realizes that even though his dad wasn't home often, every single time he returned, he made sure to do everything he could to make Ling and his mother the happiest people on earth. His father would constantly bring new gifts and surprises, always asking how he was doing and if the new toy was more fun than his old ones. He poured out love, affection, and attention whenever he had the chance. Ling's mother asks Zoe, "Are you leaving again?" Zoe turns and replies, "Yes," but asks her not to worry because if everything goes according to plan, this will be his very last expedition. He states that the next time he returns, he won't ever need to leave again, and they can finally live happily as a complete family. However, Ling remembers that this was the final time he ever saw his father because he never returned from that trip. And tragically, not only did his father vanish, but his mother did too. He realizes that if this broken family is ever going to be mended, maybe he's the only one who can actually do it. He starts to wonder if this strange magic book really holds the key to his awakening. He notes that the learning method recorded within the bone book is completely different from any orthodox magic he's ever heard of. He gets out of bed, deciding that regardless of the outcome, he's already failed countless times before. So what's one more failure going to hurt? He begins focusing his mind, thinking there's absolutely no harm in giving this a try. He starts gathering this aggressive energy and tries to draw it closer to his body. But something goes wrong. He gets frustrated and punches the wall, yelling, "I failed again." Suddenly, several bright orbs of energy surround him, and he's utterly shocked to realize its magical power, meaning he can finally perceive magic. Just as quickly, he starts feeling a tremendous, overwhelming pain. He starts coughing up blood, wondering why it suddenly feels like his entire body is about to explode. He kneels down as all that intense energy pours violently into his body. He panics, wondering, am I actually going to die right here? But then he gets furious, saying there's no way he can die like this. If he dies now, how will he ever find his family? Outraged, he endures the pain, screams, and gathers every last bit of energy he possibly can. Suddenly, he finds himself in a completely dark, empty place. Still confused, he thinks, this is so strange. Why did all that magic power vanish and why did everything suddenly go black? Not understanding anything, he wonders if someone just turned off the lights. He starts to stand up, thinking he'll go outside and check things out. However, when he moves his hand, he touches something strange. He grabs the sphere in his hand, asking, what is this thing? Could it be a ball or maybe an egg? Suddenly, the sphere lights up, displaying a system screen that reads, "Dear Mr. Ling Lanster, greetings." This startles him so much. He drops the sphere and backs away as fast as he can, demanding to know what it is. The sphere replies that it's his personal butler, and stresses that it's been patiently waiting for him for over 10 years. The sphere starts emitting a strange energy, welcoming him and stating that this sacred place belongs exclusively to our protagonist. The surroundings begin to shift, and suddenly the black space starts taking on a distinct form. The sphere announces this is the home of dragons. Ling is terrified by this, immediately imagining huge, unbelievably powerful dragons everywhere. He frantically starts looking around, asking, are there any dragons nearby? The system replies that once the dragon egg right in front of him hatches, then there will be dragons here. Our protagonist is stunned and asks, that is actually a dragon egg. The system confirms it, emphasizing that this is the very first dragon egg Ling has received, and explains he can't return to the real world until he successfully raises this dragon and completes the basic feeding task. Ling hits the system in frustration, yelling, is this a joke? Will I really be able to return after raising it? Because once that thing hatches, it's going to eat me alive. Suddenly, he hears a sound, looks over, and sees the egg's shell starting to crack. He's utterly terrified as a part of the dragon is already poking out. The system, still registering the impact from Ling's attack, gives him a friendly reminder. It explains that if he doesn't drip some of his own blood onto the dragon egg before the shell fully breaks, the dragon will absolutely eat him after it hatches. This news makes Ling even more frantic. Time is running out, and even without fully understanding what's happening, he draws some of his blood, thinking he has to do this to form a bond with this monstrous, world-destroying creature. He jumps forward, manages to place his blood on the egg just before it finally cracks open. Suddenly, an unimaginable burst of energy erupts from the egg, violently throwing our protagonist far away. He slowly opens his eyes and asks, did I actually succeed? Looking in front of him, he sees a small baby dragon. He's actually a little relieved, wondering if this tiny thing really is a dragon, the most terrifying creature in the world. Ling casually flicks the dragon, knocking it over. He starts to feel a bit calmer, thinking, is this serious? It's just a hatchling, so there's really nothing to be afraid of. Ling decides to help the baby dragon and removes part of the eggshell that was blocking its vision. However, the dragon instantly becomes enraged, asking how a lowly human dares to touch him, and attacks by kicking Ling right in the face. Seeing this overwhelming strength, Ling realizes, yep, this really is a dragon, and apparently thanks to the system, he can understand the dragon's language. Several system windows pop up in front of him announcing, task completed. Congratulations on acquiring your first dragon. Dragon creator, you have earned 5 experience points and 50 gold. You've been awarded the beginner reward, 1,000 gold. The system explains that gold can be used to buy feed, field structures, and field expansions. It clarifies that system gold and real-world gold have an equivalent 1-to-1 exchange rate. Ling starts getting a little more excited, asking if he can really use actual money. The system prompts him to continue the main task and explains that he needs to build a fire-type dragon nest. The reward for this is 5 experience points and 50 gold. The protagonist holds the baby dragon in his hands and asks, I really have to build a fire-type dragon nest. Well, if that's true, then I guess I should build a home for this little hatchling. The baby dragon starts getting angry, trying to breathe fire at Ling, saying, no one would appreciate a house made by a human. Are you joking? However, Ling totally ignores what the baby dragon is saying and starts messing with the system interface. He notices he can build a beginner fire-type dragon nest for just 100 gold, which he thinks is totally inexpensive. The dragon keeps complaining, asking the protagonist to let him go, insisting, how could I ever use a house made by a human? Suddenly, a structure begins to be built nearby, and the system quickly notifies that the area has been expanded and congratulates him for completing the task, stating he earned 5 experience points and 50 gold. The description reads, Beginner Fire-type Dragon Nest, Fire-type Dragon's Paradise. Growth 1 more day can hold up to 500 gold. Seeing that, the little dragon is completely delighted with the new place. Without a second thought, it jumps right into the small volcano, absolutely loving the moment. Ling asks the hatchling, didn't you just say you didn't want that, and calls him a big liar. But hey, he says, at least your body is honest. The protagonist looks at his little dragon and decides that, with the way it keeps yelling yeah all the time, he should just call it yeah. However, he hears a strange noise, pays closer attention to the dragon, and realizes it's fallen asleep. He's surprised, thinking this creature really has a very simple mind. After the dragon falls asleep, the protagonist decides to follow some of the system's instructions and completes a few basic tasks. Everything is finished with just a few quick taps. It's surprisingly comfortable being a dragon breeder. The plants he planted are dragon scale fruits, which are one of the dragon race's favorite fruits. Their growth period is only 1 day. After feeding, the dragon's growth value will increase by 10. Ling looks at the system, confirms he's awakened the dragon and completed all the necessary tasks, and asks, can I finally leave now? The system tells him to use the command exit to leave this place. When he snaps his fingers and says exit, the entire world he was in starts to fade away, and he instantly returns to his bed. As he slowly opens his eyes, he realizes several people are standing around him. He asks, why is everyone here just staring at me? The people are completely shocked by his presence. He asks what happened that they're all so stunned. Carl and a young man tell him to look at the ceiling, and as he does, he sees it's totally destroyed. The two cheer excitedly, shouting that the young master actually managed to blow up the ceiling. Even Ling is shocked, asking, how in the world did I do that? Trying to quickly change the subject, he asks, is something like that really worth celebrating? The young boy insists, yes, we absolutely should celebrate because in that moment the protagonist managed to unleash. Blaine interrupts the boy, saying that Ling unleashed an extremely powerful amount of magical energy, confirming that it truly came from him. Hearing that he actually managed to do that, our protagonist is completely stunned. He looks at his hand and says, I understand now. I can really sense magical power. He starts wondering if all of this happened because of that mysterious magic book Oliver gave him. While the others are celebrating loudly in the background, he quietly wonders why he was pulled into that strange space right when he awakened his magic. The protagonist calls Carl over and asks him to take a look at the book. He explains that he'd like the knight to try following the book's cultivation instructions and report back if he feels anything unusual. A little while later, the protagonist notes that neither Carl nor his uncle felt anything different after reading the book, suggesting that perhaps only he can enter that mysterious space. Furthermore, every time he tries to tell others about it, the system immediately shuts him down. And to make matters worse, ever since he blew up the roof, whenever he tries to meditate, he ends up coughing up blood. The system pops up, warning that the dragon's level will act as the limit of his magic level. Forcing it too much could literally cause the user's body to explode. Ling is told he must quickly raise the fire dragon Yia to level 1. Until the dragon reaches level 1, the user cannot safely use magic. After receiving this information, he realizes that all this time, it was the system itself that was limiting his absorption of magic power. Frustrated by this whole situation, Ling tries his best to just avoid returning to the ranch entirely. However, that annoying butler invades his real life, appearing right outside the subspace. The butler announces that the food supply is insufficient, and therefore, the fire dragon Yia's health has already dropped to -10. Ling tries to just keep eating and ignore the urgent message. But the system starts shouting at him, saying that while he can ignore his own basic needs, the hatchling is actually starving. The system questions, what kind of truly qualified farmer are you? Crucially, nobody else seems to know about the dragon's subspace or the system at all, besides Ling. Blaine notices the protagonist seems a bit distant and asks why he's not eating his food. Ling tries to cover it up, saying he suddenly lost his appetite. One of the maids appears, bringing him yet another plate of food. Blaine asks how he can eat so little, emphasizing that he should eat more, as practicing magic is very good for the body. Ling thanks his uncle for the kind words, but the system just starts laughing at him. Blaine continues, saying he's already informed Oliver about the protagonist's magic awakening, and that Oliver may soon come to take Ling to study at their magic academy, Sagrada. Ling is surprised and asks, I'm really going to the Sacred Iris Academy. The Sagrada Academy is known as the best magic academy in the entire Orandi Empire. Oliver and the protagonist's father were both students there. Zoe in particular was one of the most talented students the entire academy had ever seen. While relaxing happily in his room, lying on the bed and thrilled by the news, several warning messages suddenly pop up right in front of him. The system notifies that the fire dragon Yia's health has dropped below 10, and if the protagonist doesn't return quickly to feed it then. If the dragon dies, the breeder will be reverted into a dragon egg as compensation for the ranch's loss. Ling becomes absolutely desperate upon reading that, asking, what kind of bizarre rule is that? After learning this, he has no choice but to feed the dragon every single day. While the little dragon eats, Ling thinks it really has a massive appetite. He never imagined it would end up draining his energy like this. Ling then muses that maybe if the dragon eats and sleeps well, it'll level up faster, which would prevent the little hatchling from developing any strange anomalies. The protagonist flicks the dragon on the head again, making it angry, and it yells at its bro not to hit its head. The dragon tries to hit him back, insisting, I'm getting stronger now. The system appears and says that the protagonist is becoming more and more like a qualified breeder. Ling counters, saying he's also becoming more and more like a wolf in sheep's clothing. The system says it doesn't matter what the ranchmaster says, but just reminds him that it was thanks to them that he finally managed to perceive magical power. Ling looks at the system and asks, is it really thanks to you that I can feel magic? The butler says yes, and emphasizes that it can give him even more than just that. The protagonist asks, what do you mean by that? Suddenly, the entire place starts changing, and the butler announces that the fire dragon Yia has successfully reached level 1. And with that, the protagonist has now unlocked the magical training room. The butler suggests, why don't you try the first lesson inside the training room? As soon as he enters, the very first thing he has to do is the meditation balance board. Ling tries to balance, thinking, I won't fall the moment I lose concentration, so how am I even supposed to concentrate and meditate? A timer appears, and after only 5 seconds the butler warns that time is up. The meditation failed, so he will now drop the hammer of retribution. The hammer starts falling, weighing 40 tons. The protagonist is absolutely terrified, saying, that is brutal. However, the hammer slams right into his face, hurting him badly. But before he can fall, something grabs his foot and pulls him back onto the board. He's totally confused, not knowing what the heck is going on. The butler says that unless he successfully meditates, he'll never be able to leave the balance board. And if he fails to meditate for 5 seconds, the hammer of retribution will be released yet again. Seeing he has absolutely no way out, he tries his best to focus and asks the system, are you trying to train me or are you trying to kill me? However, another 5 seconds pass and he still can't concentrate. This time, 80 tons hit him. This happens over and over again until finally he starts to focus, and the butler congratulates him for completing the training, stating that he has just leveled up. With his face all bruised up, he smiles, thrilled because he's now at level 1. Sometime later, he goes into the forest and says it's been 7 days of intense training, so he should finally be able to experience all that power. He activates his magic perception, and magic begins to surround him. Ling tries to use his power, but only a tiny, small fireball comes out. He looks at his hand, asking, why is it so small? He quickly puts it out saying that's so embarrassing. Thankfully, no one is around to see this. However, when he looks to the side, he sees little Jack standing right there. Jack immediately runs off, shouting loudly that the young master can use fire magic. Ling is so embarrassed, he yells for Jack to shut up and not tell anyone something so humiliating. However, a small attack suddenly shoots toward Jack, but the boy manages to dodge it. Ling is surprised, wondering if it's just his imagination, or if the fireball actually got a bit stronger. The butler appears and says that Ling should pay attention, as the power of magic is directly affected by the farmer's proficiency. Ling asks little Jack if he wants to try again, but the boy just starts crying, screaming for him to stay away. Ling's peaceful days in that small fief finally came to an end, all thanks to Jack's joyful screams spreading the news. After Oliver received Blaine's letter, he quickly sent back an acceptance letter from the Sacred Academy. Ling was overjoyed and hugged his uncle with all the love in the world. Because of that, all the villagers looked at him warmly, wishing him good luck and asking him to take care of himself as much as possible. And with that heartfelt farewell, Ling Lanster finally stepped onto the road for the first time, on his way to becoming a great mage. It takes about a month by carriage to travel from the fief to the academy. During the day, Jack would guide them toward the academy, and at night, the protagonist would go to the ranch to train and raise his dragons. Without even realizing it, the little dragon kept getting bigger and bigger. Yia was now a bit annoyed, staring intensely at the protagonist. Ling asks, "Why are you looking at me like that, Yia?" Currently, the little dragon's stats are Level 3. Skills: Dragon Breath, Dragon Power, Fire Magic Immunity, Magic Bite, Fireball, Shield. Habitat: Small Fire Dragon Nest. A red message appears stating the situation is critical due to overcrowding. Exit: 10 gold coins per minute. Growth value 3 out of 500. Health value 100 out of 100. Suddenly, the dragon attacks the protagonist, insisting that it wants a new habitat. Ling gets scared, saying, "This little hatchling is so much more lovable than the butler." The protagonist promises, "I'll give you a new habitat, but before that, I want you to come with me to see the outside world." Yia stares at the protagonist asking, "Are you being serious?" The butler interjects, saying that upon receiving the farmer master's command, he will immediately transfer the host and Yia to the designated location. The dragon starts getting excited. Ling asks, "What's wrong, are you scared?" But the dragon quickly replies, "That's nonsense, I'm not afraid of anything." However, at the exact moment the two are teleported out, someone else notices and opens their eyes. A powerful warrior with a giant dragon asks, "Why is there a dragon outside the Rift Valley?" Yia slowly opens his eyes and asks his master, "Where are we?" He says, "This place is so much bigger than that miserable place I was in before." The protagonist asks Yia, "Are you enjoying it? Do you want to fly around a bit?" The dragon gets extremely happy and proudly spreads his wings. After a month on the road, the protagonist gradually accepts his fate, realizing there's no way to get rid of that strange ranch, so he might as well work with it. Ling decides he will help raise the dragons, knowing that this will help him grow stronger and stronger until he can finally find his father and clear his family's name. Suddenly, an arrow comes flying right toward them, but Yia manages to dodge it. Ling gets scared and wonders, are there dragon hunters nearby? However, a small explosion occurs in the forest, and cries for help begin to echo. But he also hears people saying they absolutely must not retreat, because this is the caravan's last hope. He also hears someone else say they shouldn't even care about the caravan, because if they do, they'll just die quietly. And that's exactly why, the voice insists, we must deliver these goods. The protagonist asks, is this a robbery? He continues hearing voices pleading desperately for help and mercy, until suddenly he hears someone shout, "Young master." He instantly recognizes the voice, and realizes that little Jack is also caught in the middle of all this. Serpents were surrounding them while they were tied tightly to a tree. Jack was starting to cry in terror. He thought his young master had been so focused on practicing magic that he had lost a lot of weight. So Jack decided to go out and look for some food for him. However, as he was passing by the caravan, a group of bad guys suddenly jumped out from the forest. They quickly defeated all the soldiers who were guarding the caravan. Their leader approached the head of the Mason Trade Guild, named Lucas, and demanded he reveal where the goods were hidden. Otherwise, he warned his entire group would be destroyed, one by one. The bandit leader used one of his snakes to attack a soldier, who quickly began to die a painful death. He warned Lucas that this would continue if the guild leader didn't immediately cooperate. Lucas started to panic as he watched his companions falling, but even so, he shut his eyes and began to cry. Trembling uncontrollably, he said he couldn't do it because the buyer of those goods was extremely powerful. If they lost the merchandise, they would be completely crushed and unable to sell anything ever again. The bandit leader stared at him coldly and said, "That's fine, we'll just keep going anyway." He snapped his fingers, and a snake slithered directly toward little Jack. Terrified, Jack could only think of apologizing to his young master, believing he wouldn't be able to serve him any longer. The snake lunged, but a fireball shot across the sky, burning the ropes and the snakes. The bandit leader asked what is going on, but realized something was speeding right toward him. The protagonist kicked him squarely in the face and jumped to the other side. He mocked the bandit, saying, "You actually have a very flexible body." Struggling, the bandit leader managed to get up while his men asked if he was okay. Jack was absolutely amazed to see his young master had come to save him. Ling told him firmly, "Step back because things are getting dangerous now." At that moment, the two groups faced each other, and the bandit realized that if that fire magic was cast by the brat in front of them, then he must be at least a third-level mage. But the leader, still furious, asked, "Is a third-level mage really enough to make all of us wet our pants?" He questioned if they had forgotten who the real leader of this gang was. Drawing his sword, he announced, "I am also a third-level knight, and compared to a mage who needs chanting, knights have absolute dominance in close combat." He attacked fiercely, but the protagonist dodged, surprised by the sheer strength of his opponent. The bandit leader continued to attack fiercely, while Ling tried to evade all his strikes. He thought the bandit was right. Mages have absolutely no advantage in close-quarters combat. Plus, it was Yia who cast that fire spell. But to avoid revealing the existence of his dragon, Ling had ordered him to return to the ranch immediately. The bandit leader kept charging, asking Ling if dodging was the only thing he could do. With a quick movement, he appeared right behind Ling, who was shocked by his speed. The protagonist tried to dodge, but he wasn't fast enough. The attack only grazed him, but it sent him flying. Wounded, he got up trembling, realizing he couldn't keep dodging forever. He thought that at least all that time spent on the ranch was paying off, since he had increased his agility and mental strength in the training room. Now he knew he had to fight back. He began gathering magic in his hand and called out to the flames. But before he could even finish the chant, the bandit leader struck again, landing another heavy blow that launched him into a tree and made him crash hard to the ground. The bandit grabbed him by the hair and said, "You're so naive it's almost cute." He added that in front of a knight of equal level, a mage has absolutely no chance in a fight. Then he brutally threw the protagonist against a large rock. After taking so many hits, Ling was breathing heavily and could barely stand up. He realized he was truly at a massive disadvantage. Facing that man head-on would be a major problem for him. Suddenly, the system appeared, stating that it had detected the ranch master was fighting for the first time and would now begin synchronizing with dragon magic. This completely caught Ling off guard. The butler continued explaining that the ranch master was currently a level 1 fire dragon ranch master. Available skills: basic magic shield, bite and claw. Instant fire magic fireball. The system asked, "Do you want to proceed with the import?" The protagonist started wondering if the instant fireball was the ability the hatchling got after eating the dragon scale fruit, and he was extremely shocked to discover he could actually use the dragon's magic. The butler confirms that it's all true, stating that dragon magic is naturally 2 levels above human magic, and emphasizing that Ling can use dragon magic as long as it doesn't exceed his own level. The more dragons the protagonist acquires, the more types of magic he'll be able to use. Ling starts smiling, thinking, the system really is amazing. He quickly selects a yes. However, the bandit charges again and brutally kicks him, yelling, "Don't get distracted during a fight." He mocks him, asking, "Where is that magic you're so proud of? Aren't you going to use it?" He starts stomping on Ling, saying that if he's really not going to use magic anymore, then he stands absolutely no chance of winning. He prepares for the final, devastating blow, but at the very last second, Ling reaches out to confirm the butler's prompt. The bandit leader sneers, asking if that skinny waist of his can actually handle this attack. Ling quickly turns and uses the instant fireball, which takes the form of a dragon, causing a deafening roar. The bandit leader manages to dodge, but his sword is completely melted into slag. The entire gang starts to panic, realizing the protagonist used instant cast magic. With a trembling voice, the leader asks, "He can really use that kind of spell?" Ling gets up and starts laughing, asking the bandit, "In front of a mage who can instantly cast spells, do you still think a knight without a sword stands a chance?" The entire gang immediately kneels, asking if the protagonist would like to share a meal with them. However, Ling continues his assault, unleashing an explosion that blasts everyone away while yelling at them to disappear. Shortly after saving everyone, Lucas asks if the healing magic is working properly on Ling. Ling says yes and thanks the leader of the merchants, nodding that his wounds are all healed up now. Lucas replies, "There's no need to thank me. In fact, everyone here should be thanking you, since it was all thanks to you that we managed to protect our valuable goods." This confuses Ling a bit, making him wonder if they're thanking him not for saving their lives, but for saving the merchandise. He's shocked, realizing that for these merchants, goods are actually more valuable than human lives. Suddenly, they announce that they've finally arrived, and that this is the caravan's unexpected harvest. They pull off a cloth and reveal a maiden from the elf forest. An elf was tied up, being treated exactly like a product. The moment Ling sees her, he's completely stunned, since that species has been extinct ever since dragons destroyed the world, the life form most similar to humans. Those are the elves. The merchant leader starts laughing, saying, "No man could resist such an adorable child," and urges Ling to accept her as a gift. Ling starts getting irritated. Lucas hugs him, saying, "We're all men here, so there's nothing to be ashamed of." He gets even closer, whispering that he wants to share something, and explains that when they found the elf, everyone was completely enchanted by her. She only looked scared and had no injuries, but the mercenaries around her might have died protecting her. After all, he says, something that beautiful could easily be sold for at least 1 million gold. Moreover, he adds, "This isn't just a thank you gift for you, Ling, but also a sincere invitation to join the Mason Trade Guild." Ling asks that's really an invitation. The guild leader says yes, adding that the guild recently faced a major crisis, and if they had a few more geniuses like Ling who can instantly cast magic, the trade guild could easily grow stronger. Ling walks toward the cage holding the elf and thanks Lucas for the generous gesture. He uses his fire magic to burn the ropes that are binding the elf. Lucas immediately panics and asks, "What are you doing?" Ling begins breaking the cage, saying that merchants who treat life as mere merchandise are simply unacceptable to him. Lucas gets nervous and asks, "Do you know how valuable that item is? This will cost us a fortune." Ling fires a small fireball at the ground near the guild leader, frightening him completely. Terrified of Ling, Lucas runs off, saying Ling can do whatever he wants with the girl. The other soldiers, also afraid after witnessing Ling's power, quickly flee, leaving the elf behind. Ling continues using fire magic and melts the cage that held her captive. He reaches out and tells her there's no need to be afraid. "I'm here to free you." A bit hesitant, having only been treated as merchandise until now, she avoids his hand at first, but eventually accepts his help and steps out of the cage. Ling asks if the flames hurt her at all. Shyly, she lowers her gaze and thanks him, but he smiles and says, "It was nothing." The protagonist introduces himself as Ling, and if she doesn't mind, asks for her name. The elf becomes even more embarrassed. He also feels a bit awkward, thinking that she got startled far too easily like a little bunny. He tries to ease the situation by saying, "It's okay if you don't want to tell me your name, since we'll meet again anyway." He turns around and starts walking away, telling her she should leave this place and not let anyone else capture her. But she suddenly shouts no, and even though she's very shy, she starts trying to speak, yelling that her name is Nike. Still introverted, she says that if she told him her name, then he wouldn't push her away. The elf grabs the protagonist's arm, showing a mixture of fear and gratitude. Meanwhile, little Jack was happily roasting some meat. He laughs happily, saying he finally managed to get some delicious meat for his master. Inside the carriage, Nike was eating incredibly quickly, like she hadn't eaten in days. Ling gets startled and tells her to slow down or she might choke. He asks if she wants some water, and the elf is surprised, quickly taking the cup from his hand and gulping it down. He then asks why, after finally gaining her freedom, she chose to stay by his side instead of returning to her clan. Nike becomes a bit sad, and with tears welling in her eyes, starts explaining that she simply can't go back. She says it's because she was too playful and ended up getting lost in the deep forest. And by the time she finally found her way home, her clan had already vanished, and the village had been completely destroyed with humans everywhere. The humans were angry because the elves had been there just the day before. However, one of the soldiers heard a noise and looked to the side, seeing a flower basket. Nike began running through the forest as fast as she could, thinking how the chief of her clan had already warned that, once they won, humans were absolutely to be avoided. But she got a little careless and tripped over a rope that was left as a trap. When she looked back, it was already too late, and that's how she got caught. That's why she desperately tried to escape and find the members of her clan. But no matter how many times she tried to run, she was always captured in the end. While telling her story, she trembled, cried, and kept her head down because her whole life, her family and her home, had been completely destroyed and violently taken from her. The protagonist becomes extremely angry hearing this and slams the table, calling those people nothing but filthy bandits. The elf is startled by his sudden anger, but he quickly calms down and says that his anger wasn't directed at her at all. A bit awkwardly, he admits he's also human and asks if she's afraid of him. But Nike quickly says no, which surprises him. She emphasizes that he is her benefactor. She remembers that he said merchants treat life like merchandise, and that he wouldn't accept that. That's why she believes he's completely different from those bad men. Ling looks at the elf a bit embarrassed and says it was nothing, adding that since she feels that way, she can follow him for now. And if they manage to find any clues about the whereabouts of the elf clan, he promises he'll help her return. Nike smiles happily and thanks him sincerely. He He explains that he's heading to the academy now, but only staff are allowed to stay on the school grounds. The elf starts getting excited, and he says that if she doesn't mind, she could pretend to be his maid. Upon hearing that, she goes silent, begins to tremble, and even stammers, saying her grandfather once told her that maid is an extremely dangerous word. But still, she believes she can do it. Ling gets flustered and shouts that she's getting the wrong idea entirely, stressing that he won't make her do anything weird, and explains that all she needs to do is call him young master and change her clothes. He also says that as for everyone else, she really doesn't need to worry about them. This calms her down and she starts smiling again, saying it's fine and calling him young master. Ling breathes a little easier, thinking that apparently everything's been cleared up now. He turns and starts leaving the carriage, saying it's already getting late and that she should sleep inside the carriage that night while he'll sleep outside with little Jack. As soon as he steps out, Jack asks why his master left the carriage. He asks if he's not welcome there. Little Jack says he's always welcome, but just can't understand why he'd make that choice, since a beautiful lady is right there inside the carriage. And yet, he insists, you still want to sleep outside. The protagonist gets a bit annoyed and tells him to stop saying things like that. 3 days later, they finally arrive at the Sacred Iris Academy. Jack says, we've finally made it. As they get out, Ling remembers that Oliver had said he would tell him more about the book made from dragon bones once they arrived at the academy. He begins to wonder if Oliver already knew there were dragons inside the book when he sent it. Suddenly, the butler appears, saying that it has detected the host's arrival at the Sacred Iris Academy. It tells him to explore the academy to find quest clues and unlock the water dragon egg. Ling is surprised to learn that there are other dragons. The butler tells the farmer not to be so dismissive and asks if having more dragons wouldn't actually make him stronger. The protagonist asks, I can really get stronger from this. The system says yes and emphasizes that the farmer has only hatched one dragon egg so far and that his current status is Farmer Ling, first-class mage level, total unlocked species, 1. The butler explains that as long as the farmer continues to complete missions and unlock all 6 dragon egg types, fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness, then he'll gain affinity with all magical attributes. Ling begins reflecting on all those magical attributes and gets incredibly excited, saying that if he can become a sage-level mage, things will be much easier. The higher the risk, the greater the reward. That's the kind of trade-off that's truly worth it. Excited to discover he can get even stronger and master all magical attributes, he starts heading straight toward the academy. He looks back and tells little Jack and Nike to wait for him because the young master will return triumphant. Little Jack excitedly wishes his master good luck while the elf, overjoyed with everything, says, everything will be all right. Inside the school, everything ran on magic. Students were receiving deliveries, others were learning how to cast spells. Seeing all of it, the protagonist says, this is exactly what I expected from a magic academy. He approaches a statue and stares intently at it. Suddenly, someone calls out to him, saying that Associate Dean Oliver is away on business and won't be there for a while. He turns and looks at the man speaking to him. The man explains that Oliver made an exception just for him, but the academy has a tradition, and he'll need to follow him for the entrance test. Ling smiles and says he has no problem with that at all. Elsewhere, several people were gathered, wondering if the students entering the association were actually talented. Some said they believed the magic affinity or talent level must be at least average or high, but most thought they were probably just average kids. One student shouts, maybe one of them is high level since he was personally chosen by Oliver. Suddenly, the protagonist shows up, and people are a bit startled, saying he's arrived. Without any hesitation, he walks past everyone like a true king. A man holding a crystal ball calls Ling over and says his name is Fred Edmund, and he will be testing the protagonist's magical talent. He asks if Ling is ready. The protagonist smiles confidently and says, yes. Fred says he truly admires the protagonist's confidence. He tosses the crystal ball and tells Ling to just relax his mind and place his hand on it. However, Ling hesitates for a moment, realizing he forgot to check something crucial. He calls the butler and asks if the ranch will be detected by the crystal, because if they discover Yia's existence, it could be a huge problem. The system tells him not to worry, as the crystal only detects his magical talent level and nothing more. Fred calls Ling's attention, saying he's taking too long. The protagonist apologizes, starts to focus, and places his hand on the magical crystal, thinking that his magical talent shouldn't be bad since his father was a genius. Suddenly, the crystal begins to change color and emit a yellow light. Fred is impressed and wonders if that's really the supreme level. Because if that's the case, he thinks, then Ling is truly discreet. He reflects that the academy has never made exceptions before to keep things fair, and he even complained to Oliver about it. But that child, he asks, could someone like that really exist? Then he suddenly starts laughing out loud and kneels down, announcing that Ling Lanster's test result shows a low talent level, fire element, and weak affinity. Everyone around begins to feel disappointed, including the protagonist, who keeps trying to pour more of his magic into the crystal, asking, how could that possibly be? But Fred turns around, clearly uneasy about the situation. The butler appears again, saying that unfortunately, the protagonist didn't let him finish speaking earlier. It explains that Ling's magic awakening method is different from everyone else's, so his talent is limited according to his current magic level, meaning his talent will only increase as his magic level rises. Ling asks, is the butler actually joking with me? The students around start commenting, saying he's totally weak and that, despite all the talk about him, there's nothing special at all. He's not even average. And that makes others question why Oliver chose someone like that in the first place. Fred approaches Ling, sighs, and says that the associate dean made an exception for him, so Fred can't say much more. He hands Ling his materials and asks him to show up the next day right on time. Suddenly, someone approaches and calls out to him. The butler warns that an important quest character has been detected. It says the person's name is Augustine, and his position is president of the Truth Student Union. The butler explains that the quest requires the protagonist to defeat him in the Mage's Trial Tower to obtain the fragment of the Water Dragon Egg. However, that will only unlock after completing the pre-quest of the Mage's Trial. Quest difficulty high. Ling is surprised and starts to wonder if the system can really assess other people's strength, realizing his first target definitely won't be easy. Augustine walks up to him and politely demands that he give up his student uniform and badge and leave the academy immediately. He says he doesn't know what tricks the protagonist used to deceive the associate dean, but for a garbage like him to sneak into the academy with such underhanded methods, just standing there already stains the academy's honor. Hearing this, Ling starts remembering his childhood, being humiliated by other children, told to go away, and asked if he thought a trader's son could just buy cereal from the store. Those people insulted him, saying that for trash like him, born of a fool, just standing there polluted the air they breathed. The protagonist starts smiling and says, for a president, Augustine, you sure talk a lot like a gangster. He asks Augustine one thing, isn't a president who stubbornly belittles others just because they're less privileged the one truly staining the academy's name? Other students nearby ask, where is Ling going with that, saying someone like him, who came in through the back door, has no right to talk about dignity. One of them adds that the president shouldn't stress over a student like that at all. He won't even pass the test, so sooner or later he'll be expelled anyway. Ling begins to get irritated, and fire magic starts forming in his hand, but he takes a deep breath and thinks he needs to calm down. Even though he's furious, he doesn't want to give up now. He admits to himself that it's true he entered through the back door, and that arguing is pointless. If he can't get along with his classmates and teachers, his studies will suffer, and that'll make it much harder to build a solid foundation to become a sage-level mage. The protagonist turns around and starts walking, leaving them standing there. However, the people immediately begin to laugh, saying he talks too much and does too little, pointing out that he's running away like a coward. He looks back, irritated, thinking that he absolutely needs to find the fastest way to become stronger, realizing he can't rely on the system alone anymore. With hatred in his heart for being treated like this his whole life, judged because of his father and his family, and constantly looked down upon, he swears that he'll use his own strength to make them all swallow their words. Shortly after, the butler welcomes the host back to the Dragon Ranch. It brings a report saying that the dragon scale fruit is ripe today and that the small fire habitat is also producing normally. However, the fire dragon Yia is obviously upset. Yia starts sucking in air and spits fire at the protagonist, yelling angrily and asking, why haven't you upgraded the habitat yet? Ling brings some fruit to the dragon, asking him to be a little more patient and endure for just 2 more days. After that, he promises to make the change. He asks the dragon to eat some of the dragon scale fruit first, but Yia refuses and starts throwing a massive tantrum, saying the protagonist said the same thing 2 days ago, and that he won't eat anything else if the habitat isn't upgraded. Ling starts force-feeding the fruit to the dragon, and insists he really will keep his promise next time. The dragon calls him a liar, and asks if Ling really thinks he'll care just because he was fed. Ling sighs and says his dragon really acts like a child, then tells the butler he wants to leave. While being teleported back, he thinks that the small fire habitat generates 500 gold per day, and that, after planting a few fruits, he still has a bit of money left. However, to upgrade the small fire habitat, he'll need a whopping 10,000 gold. The next day, he gets up and says he needs to find a quick way to make money. While getting dressed, he muses he could work as a waiter, transport goods, or even take on a few mercenary quests. He thinks that raising a child really isn't easy at all. Suddenly, he hears a sweet voice calling him, saying it's time for breakfast. He opens his bedroom door, saying he's on his way. But when he sees Nike, he's absolutely speechless. She shows him her outfit, saying the inn's servant told her it was the outfit he picked out for her. Embarrassed, she asks if he thinks it looks strange. Ling walks over to her and gently pats her head, saying it's not strange at all. He explains that it's the kind of outfit maids usually wear in the human world. However, he lowers his gaze slightly and admits that maybe he went a little too far with her. The protagonist tries to explain that if it weren't for the academy only allowing maids to accompany students, he would have bought her a beautiful dress instead. Upon hearing those words, she is completely charmed by her master's thoughtfulness and kindness. She runs to hug him, saying that she'll never feel like a burden as long as she's by his side. Ling wonders what pure essence of the forest Nike radiates. He looks at her and says, "It's all right," adding that they'll head to school right after they finish getting ready. Once he arrives at the school, he thinks that the entrance exam he took the day before made him famous across the entire academy. A man sitting at a desk asks, "Are you Ling Lanster?" And the protagonist says yes. Though visibly annoyed, the man still approves him. Ling thinks that although their attitude was terrible, none of them actually tried to make things difficult for him. After approving him, the man throws a paper at him, saying everything's ready and that he just needs to take it to his assigned classroom, which is in the construction zone, Section 1B. Once there, he needs to introduce himself to the teacher. Ling follows the instructions and heads to his class, and everything was going smoothly except for the teacher. As soon as he enters the room, the teacher slams her desk, yelling at him to stop and demanding to know who let him in. This is Professor Yisha. She calls out the protagonist, saying the things she despises most are nobles who rely solely on connections. She emphasizes that even if the whole school allowed him to enter through the back door as an exception from the associate dean, she will never allow him to stay in her class. Upon hearing her speak that way, the other students immediately start mocking him. He turns a bit irritated and asks the butler to scan everyone's abilities. The system appears, saying it will do so immediately, and a few seconds later reports the results. Kalu first-class freshman mage, Shua second-class freshman mage, Lucerne first-class freshman mage, Yummy first-class freshman mage. The protagonist starts to smile and wonders if there really isn't anyone stronger than him in this room, questioning how an academy of this level can be teaching people so ignorant that they enjoy ridiculing others. He turns to the teacher and asks, "What is the subject of the class?" She's surprised to see that he's still there and asks what he's talking about. He looks at her and says that she doesn't want him in class because she's afraid his lack of talent will affect her class's results. "But if I prove that I can outperform every single student in this room, then that should mean I have the right to stay, correct?" The students continue mocking him, asking how he thinks he'll possibly do better than them. Another student explains that the class is about potions. Lucerne says it all depends on someone's level. The higher the level and the better the mana stability, the purer the potion will be. Yisha, silently watching Ling, says, "This is very interesting." She says he's quite confident and asks if he'd be willing to raise the stakes. She says she'll give him a chance, explaining that in 1 week they'll have a potion class test. If he comes in first place, she'll allow him to stay in her class. However, if he doesn't, he'll have to leave the school and never set foot there again. That offer leaves the protagonist a little uneasy. He begins to think that if he loses for any reason, he'll be expelled, making this a very serious bet. The teacher continues to look down on him and with a firm gaze asks, "What do you think? Are you going to accept the challenge or not?" The system appears, announcing that the main quest, Water Dragon Egg Yisha's Bet, has been activated. Win condition, place first in the potion exam. Difficulty low. Rewards, Water Dragon Egg Fragment +1. Total fragments needed to obtain the Water Dragon Egg, 10 + 20 magical experience. Ling is surprised and wonders how he could have forgotten for a moment that he still has the butler, because as long as the quest is recorded, the mission is totally doable. On top of that, there are amazing rewards. Now much more confident, he looks at the teacher and says he accepts the bet, and all she has to do now is wait and see the result. He starts walking out of the room while Yisha watches him, thinking that the boy still acts that way even after getting scolded so harshly. She thinks that not only did he choose not to rely on the dean, but he's also trying to prove his worth in a dignified way. That makes her reflect and wonder if the rumors about him are completely wrong. She keeps watching him and thinks that this is all very interesting, and that things are starting to get much more exciting around here. Despite her strict demeanor, she thinks about his name and secretly hopes he'll stay and surprise her again. Shortly after, in the Academy's library, the protagonist is extremely excited and completely impressed with the place. He says it's no wonder people say that the Sacred Iris Academy Library is the most breathtaking place in the Empire, because it truly is grand. He starts walking through the place and looking at the shelves, saying there must be many books about magic potions there. While searching for his books, two students show up and say, "That's Ling, the loser who got into the academy through the back door." They ask what he's doing there. Another student says that if he's not mistaken, this is the class time for first years, so maybe Ling got kicked out for being too dumb. They keep mocking him, saying it's shameful for the whole school. The protagonist starts getting annoyed and turns to them, saying that clearly they do know how to talk big. Suddenly, a woman arrives and scolds the two students, saying they should be ashamed of themselves. The two look startled. She says upperclassmen shouldn't act like that and reminds them they're third years and still haven't learned that bullying is strictly forbidden in the library. She warns that if they don't shut up immediately, she'll personally make sure their credits are deducted. The blue-haired student remains irritated and asks if she thinks she's something special just for being a library counselor. But his friend quickly says that's enough because he doesn't want to lose any credits, so it's time to leave. The two walk away and the protagonist looks at her, thinking that it seems she saved him this time. Noticing she's being watched, she gets a little embarrassed and apologizes, trying to explain what happened with those students. Ling asks, "Why are you apologizing when those two idiots were the ones who started it?" Still embarrassed, she says she's the library counselor. "So if something bad happens in this reading environment, it's my responsibility." Ling is left speechless by that and thinks she really has a heavy sense of duty. He tries to change the subject, saying that anyway, he intended to borrow some books on magical potions and asks if he can count on her help to find some. She says yes and introduces herself, saying he can call her Vivian. She begins using her magic and a book starts glowing green. Other books begin glowing too and float right toward them. All the books land neatly in the protagonist's hands, one by one. Ling thinks that's really amazing and exactly what you'd expect from the Great Magic Academy. Vivian tells him that's the full collection of writings on magical potions. She also says she heard he's preparing for the potion test. She adds that she doesn't quite understand why he's studying like this, because it's not a written test but a practical exam. She asks if it's really a good idea to just read all those books. Ling looks at Vivian and wonders if Vivian is genuinely worried about him. Suddenly, the butler appears, saying that Yisha's bet quest hint is, wealth and beauty can be acquired through diligent study. He looks at Vivian and tells her not to worry so much because he's very confident. He starts walking, and as he passes by her, he says that, to be honest, since he entered the academy, Vivian is the first person who didn't judge him based solely on rumors. He thanks her again for everything she did for him today and, smiling, says he'll treat her to dinner once he passes the test. He says goodbye and keeps walking away. She hears everything and is left speechless, holding her dress with a bit of shyness. But then she remembers someone asked her if she remembered what her task was, emphasizing that she must do whatever it takes to stay close to the student Ling. And so, a bit flustered and uncomfortable, she says that the apologies she made earlier weren't because of those students' behavior at all. A little later that day, at the protagonist's residence at the academy, little Jack asks his young master to please stop reading those books and eat something. Ling says he will eat and asks Jack to wait just a bit longer so he can finish the book. Night falls and little Jack remains annoyed, saying his master has been reading since early morning. The protagonist says he only has 1 week until the test, so he has to move fast to have time to finish reading everything. 5 days later, Ling is completely worn out, lying slumped in the middle of the books. He holds his head and says, that must have been what the hint was referring to. The key to solving those problems is Yia. The art of potion alchemy requires great mental fortitude. Beginners have low control over their minds, and therefore many require dragon saliva as an additional ingredient in their first attempts. But if the procedure is done that way, even ordinary people can create high-level potions that can be compared to those made by renowned alchemists. A few more days passed, and finally the day of the potion test arrived. After finishing his potion, all the other students said it had to be some kind of joke and questioned whether he really managed to create a real potion, asking how he had achieved such sharp mental focus. Shua got angry and yelled that the protagonist was a blatant cheater. Yisha smacked him on the head with a piece of paper. She got annoyed and asked what they thought they'd accomplished by causing a ruckus during an evaluation, questioning if they all wanted to fail immediately. Shua got sad, lowered his head, thinking his teacher was fiercer than a mad dog, and he's literally a dog. The teacher began staring intently at the protagonist and looked at the potion he created. She started wondering if he really managed to get such a refined reagent using only his own skills. Then she used her magic to pick up the potion and said he really didn't do badly at all. She kept looking and analyzing the potion, saying that this truly was a potion of excellent quality. She noted that if no other student could make a better one, then the highest score would undoubtedly be his. She continued smiling and said that, even so, he must be aware of the doubts everyone present had. Therefore, to convince the audience, she asked if he would be willing to go up on stage and make that exact potion again. Ling looked a bit worried and asked, "Do you suspect me of cheating?" The students kept complaining and said that it was obvious the teacher suspected someone. And who else could it be but him? Another student said she already knew what happened and pointed out that the protagonist clearly used dragon saliva. The student started following that theory, and another pointed at him, shouting that it was definitely true, claiming he must have used some supplemental ingredient that grants mental stability during potion crafting, because otherwise how could a talentless nobody like him succeed? After just 7 days of solo study, Ling starts laughing and asked, "Do you really think I had used any supplementary ingredient?" He remembered when he had spent days lying down without sleep, with headaches from reading so much, and asked the butler if he was right in thinking that time in his training area flowed 7 times slower than in the real world. That's why he asked if it was possible to practice potion alchemy there. Ling slammed the table and stood up, saying that since no one believed him, he would do exactly what everyone wanted. He grabbed a flask and began walking to the front of the class, saying he'd make that potion completely from scratch. Once again, his teacher was surprised by his attitude. She kept looking at him, wondering why he accepted the challenge so easily. The protagonist recalled when he used 5 grams of ghost vine flower stems. That was attempt number 35, which failed. Then he used 10 drops of rhino demon viper saliva, attempt number 2915, also a massive failure. Finally, he used 3 grams of fire crystal and 3 grams of water crystal. And that's how he succeeded in creating his potion. He repeated this exact process inside the classroom, right in front of everyone. Yisha remained impressed, asking, how did the protagonist manage to control his mind so well? So she admitted that even though the magical power level was lower than in other potions, he still had to maintain an incredibly high level of focus, almost like entering a trance. As he continued preparing the potion, she thought that he truly stood out among all the students she had ever worked with in her entire life. A short time later, Ling held the potion in his hand and called his teacher, saying he was done. The students were still amazed, saying it was really impossible because he didn't use any extra ingredients. And even so, the purity of the potion was extremely high. The students started to reconsider, wondering if they had judged him too early and unfairly. The teacher asked him if he could tell everyone there whether that level of focus was something he was born with. Slightly embarrassed, he said he wasn't born that way, and that it was all just the result of practicing the skill relentlessly after training so much. Both the teacher and the students were surprised, asking why the protagonist suddenly acted like someone who had been through hell and lived to tell the tale. Yisha wondered if Ling had compensated for his lack of talent with an absurd amount of training. She remained confused and asked if that was why Associate Director Oliver made an exception to admit him to the academy. And on top of all that, she thought that even knowing he likely couldn't become an exceptional mage through willpower alone, at least his perseverance should serve to inspire all the members of the Magic Academy. Yisha lowers her head and takes a deep breath, saying that she calls herself an enforcer of the institution's law. But in the end, she was a victim of her own mediocrity and judgment. The teacher takes off her hat and bows deeply in front of everyone, asking the protagonist for forgiveness and admitting her mistake, saying she was wrong for not allowing him to attend her classes. The students are surprised to see this, and the protagonist becomes extremely embarrassed, asking her not to do that. She approaches him and says that, to be honest, 5 other students managed to create a potion comparable to his. But not only is he self-taught, he also had very little time to learn everything he did, and therefore, first place in that evaluation belongs to him. The system appears saying that Yisha's wager has been completed, and the rewards are Water Dragon Egg +1, Magic Experience +20. Due to the farmer's choice of a less regular and more difficult path to complete the task, the additional reward, Teleportation Matrix, has been granted. Sometime later, outside the academy, the butler says the system's conclusion, for not relying on a supplemental ingredient but instead distorting the passage of time in the training field, is that the farmer acted wisely. The protagonist says that wise or not, he just wanted to build a reputation that wasn't bad, especially in the place where his father had put in so much effort. Besides, how could he possibly use dragon saliva in such a mundane situation? He picks up one of his potions and says he still plans to trade it for real wealth. The protagonist continues making his potions and says that the saliva from that hatchling is quite useful, because with it, he can easily make advanced potions. And one bottle of those can be easily sold for gold. With a few flasks in hand, he mentions that he'll go to the merchant chamber tomorrow to sell them all. He remembers that Yia was extremely angry, shouting that if the protagonist didn't replace his habitat immediately, he would burn down the entire ranch. He takes a deep breath and says that the new nest for that hatchling can finally be built. Ling looks out the window and comments that it's getting late. Seeing the sunset, he wonders if Vivian has already finished work in the library, since he had mentioned that he'd treat her to a meal after the test. He grabs his clothes and says that if she hadn't helped him find so many books on potions, he really doesn't know how far off track he would have gone. A little later in the library, he walks through the place, but says everything feels strange because he can't find Vivian anywhere. Suddenly, someone taps his shoulder and calls him, startling him. The girl smiles and asks, "Is your name Ling?" The protagonist steps back and says yes, asking if there's a problem. The girl steps closer and says that student Vivian is behind the school building, and that, on top of that, she's getting ready to confess to him. The protagonist becomes very embarrassed and asks, "What are you talking about?" But the girl tells him not to act that way and starts pushing him, saying that even if he plans to reject her, he should at least say it to her face. Ling asks the student to stop pushing him, and suddenly the butler appears saying that the main quest, Water Dragon Egg Vivian's Bridal Carry, is active. Conditions to complete: be carried like a princess by Vivian. Quest difficulty, low. Rewards: Water Dragon Egg Fragment +1. Fragments collected so far, 1 of 10. Magic experience +20. Ling stares at the quest, not understanding what kind of nonsense this is. He gets irritated again and hits the system, swearing, asking why it's giving him this kind of stuff at this hour. The girl gets confused seeing him making gestures and talking to himself. She says he'd better hurry because she heard Vivian will stay there until he shows up. She releases a bee from her hand and tells the protagonist to follow the bee as it will guide him to the location. Ling starts getting a bit more serious and thinks that something very strange is happening because he and Vivian only met once, and even if they talked for a long time, it wouldn't be enough for her to be confessing to him. Compared to the previous quest, this one seems like a huge joke. The butler announces once again that the second main quest is in progress, Vivian's Bridal Carry. Ling starts analyzing and thinks this isn't as simple as it seems. Suddenly, he hears a scream and begins running desperately, wondering if the scream could have come from Vivian. However, as he approaches the source of the sound, he realizes something strange is going on. The area is filled with an unusual concentration of energy. He keeps looking at the place and gets closer, questioning why such a place exists within the academy. He walks up to a structure that contains some kind of portal. The portal states that Vivian Mason has entered, awaiting the second participant. The protagonist is confused, wondering why Vivian entered and why a second participant is required. He stands in front of the portal, puzzled, as someone hidden begins preparing to attack. Suddenly, he's struck from behind, hard enough to push him forward. As he tries to turn to see who attacked him, he falls into the portal asking what exactly is happening. A message appears. Ling Lanster has entered, initiation of approval beginning. The woman who attacked him also enters the realm. A mouth appears in her hand, laughing, and she begins to transform, saying that when he was bullied by the seniors, no one defended him. Still, he entered through the back door and everyone called him trash. "So why?" she asks. "Since I love helping him, I'll make sure to help him to the very end." And for that reason, the two of them can fall into despair together. On the other side of the portal, Ling is thrown out and lands on the ground right in front of a huge spike trap. As he gets up and looks ahead, he sees Vivian bound tightly by magical chains. He asks what exactly is going on, but her mouth is sealed shut. He hears a noise behind him and turns to find a gigantic monster. Just its roar nearly sends him flying into the spikes. He begins assessing the situation, wondering how a magical beast could possibly be here. The monster charges at him, and he realizes he must dodge at all costs. If he freezes because of the creature's aura, he'll die instantly. At the last second, he manages to leap, narrowly avoiding the fierce strike. Seeing the destruction the monster caused on the ground, he notes that the beast is extremely strong. But he's also surprised since he didn't expect to be able to jump that high. Then he remembers that thanks to completing Yisha's wager, he received rewards: a water dragon fragment and 20 magic experience points. After earning those points, he became a second-rank mage. However, he hadn't expected his physical abilities to improve so much from just one level up. Realizing this, he becomes more confident and thinks he should be able to fight the beast. The monster attacks again and he dodges, nodding its incredible speed. He avoids another strike. The monster keeps attacking and he keeps dodging, thinking it's great that his body can match the wolf's speed. He starts gathering his flames, thinking his attack will definitely be effective. He aims at the wolf and uses the instant fireball, launching a powerful blast that hits the beast and throws it right into the spike trap, nearly destroying everything. He celebrates, realizing his attack was indeed effective. However, the chains binding Vivian begin to break, and as a result, she starts falling directly toward the spikes. He's desperate because he won't be able to save her in time. However, some of the chains were still strong enough to hold her in place. Still worried but slightly relieved that she didn't fall, he becomes irritated, thinking that he was so focused on the fight that he completely forgot about her life. He starts wondering why she began falling, and suddenly realizes that the wolf had destroyed some of the spikes, yet it's still alive. That means every time a spike is destroyed, Vivian descends a little further. The protagonist becomes distressed, because if he doesn't get rid of the spikes, how can he possibly save her? Suddenly, he gets an idea. He thinks about going to get help. He shouts for her to wait for him, saying, "There are many advanced wind mages at the academy, and surely they'll be able to save you." She can't say anything, as her mouth is still sealed, and only tears can be seen streaming down her face. Ling thinks he just came from that place, the same one where the magical beast appeared. He turns to look at the portal, but there's nothing there anymore. He's confused, wondering why the portal no longer exists, and whether the entrance has truly vanished completely. This throws him into despair, as he asks himself if he and Vivian are really going to be trapped here. He remembers that the woman at the library said Vivian was preparing to confess to him. The protagonist wonders if the whole thing was a setup, since the person who pushed him into the portal seems to be the same girl he saw in the library. Still confused about the situation, he starts questioning why someone would do something like this, and what they would gain by trying to kill them. He tries as hard as he can to come up with a way out, but he can't find any and wonders if he should call Yia. However, he's also unsure if that's a good idea, since he doesn't know whether Vivian would be able to keep the secret. While lost in thought, the monster behind him gets back up and charges to attack again. But he's so irritated that he turns around furiously, tells the monster not to bother him, and attacks back, launching it far away. A butler appears, congratulating him for defeating the Phantom Wolf, and informing him that he's earned 1 magic experience point. Ling asks what is a phantom wolf. The system replies that the question is outside the ranch's jurisdiction, so he'll have to figure it out on his own. The protagonist gets angry and yells at the butler, saying he can't just leave at a time like this. Suddenly, he notices something next to him. A small amount of energy begins to flow from the monster and right toward Vivian. He asks, "Is that really what I think it is?" Vivian looks a bit frightened as she sees it approaching, but the protagonist wonders if this is really how it works. That purple thing starts getting closer to Vivian, pulling her a little nearer. The protagonist thinks that every time a thorn breaks, Vivian drops a bit lower, and that each wolf he defeats moves her closer to the safe area where he is. Suddenly, he looks back and sees 2 wolves appear at the same time. He yells that this can't be happening, and wonders if every wolf he defeats will automatically split into 2. He starts questioning whether this kind of design is some sort of mechanism, until he begins to remember something like this written in the student manual. Third-year students and above can enter a trial realm and have a battle simulation with demonic beasts. The instructor will configure a passing mechanism based on the evaluation content, and once passed, you'll be automatically transported out. The 2 wolves begin to attack. Ling gets ready for combat, annoyed because he didn't read the material thoroughly at the time, so that's all he remembers. And the reason the wolf's name has the word phantom in front is because this is a trial realm intended for upperclassmen. He continues fighting the 2 wolves and thinks that, judging by the current mechanism's design, the key to passing this trial is to save Vivian. He defeats 1 wolf and gains another magic experience point. He thinks it's not so bad and decides to keep fighting with everything he has. The wolves keep multiplying, and he keeps using everything he has to win. The battle between them doesn't stop for a second, and he steps back, thinking he can't keep killing them like this. Each one he kills splits into 2, and he won't be able to handle that many using only the fireball spell. If it keeps going this way, even if he isn't bitten, he'll end up being pushed off the cliff. One of the wolves attacks, and he remembers that when he inherited Yia's magic besides the fireball, there were 3 other basic spells he could use. The butler appears, saying that currently the ranch has only 1 fire dragon, and the rancher's level is 1. Skills: basic magic, shield, bite, claw, fire magic, fireball. The system asks if he wants to proceed with the import. The protagonist activates his shield and manages to block the bite. However, the wolf's bite is very strong and manages to pierce a bit of his shield. Seeing he won't be able to hold it much longer, he pushes the wolf off, throwing it down the cliff, saying, "This really doesn't end." He activates Claw and starts attacking the monsters at the same time. However, he's still exhausted and thinks that even though Claw can seriously injure the wolves, it still can't solve the biggest problem. The system notifies once again congratulating him for defeating a phantom wolf and nodding that he gained 1 magic experience point. He starts to ask why he got a point of experience since he clearly didn't kill a wolf just now. Looking to the side, he sees a magic cluster floating up from the cliff. With that, he realizes that knocking a wolf down there also activates the mechanism. As soon as he figures that out, he starts laughing and thinks that as long as he can control the numbers, then he has nothing to fear. He activates his magic once more and charges toward the wolves, thinking that now they can all come at once. With Claw, he can hurt and push all the wolves. With the fireball, he throws them off the cliff. Looking to the side, Ling notices that Vivian is coming toward him, and he thinks that apparently he won't need to fight anymore. She grabs him tightly, scared and crying. He tries to calm her down, saying that it's all right now. He kneels down and says they've finished the trial, so they should be teleported out soon. However, the two of them hear an extremely loud roar coming from the depths of that place. The protagonist asks, what could that be? Even while crying, Vivian starts healing Ling and with a trembling voice apologizes and says that as soon as she entered, she was tied up above and could only watch from there, unable to do anything, and that to save her, he had to get hurt a lot. He starts smiling and pats her head, saying that she really likes to apologize. The protagonist says she doesn't need to feel guilty because she also helped him before. And besides, I'm not just saving you, I'm saving myself. He explains that he thought if she was free, they could leave that trial realm. At no point did I imagine there would be another stage. Ling looks at her and says she's been at the academy longer than him and asks if she knows anything else about the trial realm. Vivian lowers her head, apologizes again, and explains that the trial realm is meant for upperclassmen, so she's not familiar with it either. Ling walks up to her with a smile and says she's apologizing again. He tells her to relax a bit because she doesn't need to blame herself like that. With tears in her eyes, she starts apologizing again but stops, saying she won't do it anymore. The protagonist stands up, saying that if they don't have any information, then all they can do is prepare for the next stage. He says he just killed several wolves and that it might be even more dangerous down below, but she shouldn't worry because he will protect her well. Vivian pushes his hand away and refuses. She takes a green crystal in her hand and says that for the next stage, she wants to fight by his side. That crystal begins to transform into a magical scepter, surprising the protagonist. Suddenly some bats appear, and as soon as she sees them, she runs and hides behind the protagonist. He simply snaps his fingers and manages to defeat both bats. He looks at her and asks, "Are you really going to fight by my side?" And she replies yes, shouting that what just happened was only an accident. The two start going down the stairs carefully. Ling asks Vivian if she also feels the mist getting lighter. She says yes and also mentions that it sounds like there's some kind of noise. Out of nowhere, the sound she was hearing happens right next to her. The bridge begins to collapse right behind them. Ling yells for her not to stay there and starts pulling her, saying they need to run, but that wasn't enough. A few seconds later, the bridge under their feet also breaks, and he thinks there's no other way. He gets ready to snap his fingers and asks the butler to release Yia. At the last second, Vivian starts shouting and casting a spell. "Oh, great wind, your believer prays to you, grant me wings." With that, she begins to fly and holds the protagonist in her arms. He's surprised and says that she knows wind magic, and that's really amazing. She smiles, saying she studied it for 2 years. The butler appears, congratulating the user for completing the task. Bridal Gate, Bridal Phase, Princess Vivian. Rewards, Dragon Egg Fragment plus 220 magic experience. He thinks that not only was he saved, but the system task was also completed by accident. So now I owe her another favor. The butler congratulates him once more for reaching level 3, and the current experience points are 12 out of 200. Since Yia cares about her new home, she has no intention of learning new skills. There's no draconic magic to inherit with this upgrade. Shortly after, Vivian says they've finally reached the bottom. They begin walking through the place, and suddenly, a very bright light starts to blind them. The protagonist asks if those are oscillating stones. When someone steps on the valley floor, it automatically lights up, and that's very human-like. A path was lit with torches in front of them. Vivian gets excited and points forward, saying there's a portal there. She asks, "Are we really going to get out now?" Ling looks around and sees the bodies of the wolves he defeated earlier and thinks they haven't revived. And the path to the portal isn't blocked either. He continues analyzing the situation and tells her that he doesn't believe the one who set up this trial would be kind enough to let them leave so easily. He asks her to stay behind him because he wants to test something. He throws a stone that bounces across several points along the path, wanting to see if there's another hidden mechanism. Suddenly, the stone hits a point that sinks, and he tells her to be careful. Ling thinks he already knew there would be another mechanism. Vivian looks at him and yells because his leg has a small wound. He tells her not to worry because he's fine. It's just, he gets up and starts to wonder why he was attacked since it was the stone that triggered the mechanism, not him. Vivian tries to activate her healing magic, but she's so nervous that she can't concentrate enough. She asks the protagonist to look at that sculpture. As soon as he looks, he asks if she really thinks. Suddenly, it transforms into a small wolf. The two are surprised, asking if that's really a wolf pup. Vivian says that the animal is really cute. The protagonist thinks that it looks exactly like Yia. As soon as the pup wakes up, it looks forward and starts growling, angry because the two were there. The noise was deafening, causing pain in their ears. The wolves that were previously dead now begin to rise again, and the protagonist yells, asking if that little cub can really revive the other wolves. Ling says that if they stop to analyze the situation, all the others were revived by that white pup. So the key to getting out of there for good is that being. The protagonist begins fighting the wolves again and starts defeating them easily. However, every time he defeats one, it's immediately revived. The protagonist thinks this really will never end, because he won't be able to find a chance to deal with that wolf pup if he's surrounded by so many wolves all the time. Vivian begins reciting her magic again, saying, "Oh, great wind, your believer prays to you. Turn into a sharp blade and destroy the enemy." An attack shoots from her and quickly heads toward the pup. The protagonist says she's really amazing. However, the pup senses the attack coming and starts growling again, creating a barrier in front of itself that blocks the attack. Both of them are shocked, as they didn't expect it to defend itself. Vivian starts trembling upon seeing that the little pup was able to create an immunity shield. She remembers a merchant fleet so large that only that child returned. People around her used to say they heard it was an encounter with an 8th-ranked demonic beast. The escort team couldn't break through the immunity shield, and when reinforcements arrived, only that child was left alive, hidden under a pile of adult corpses. Remembering that, she starts screaming that they can't fight and repeats it several times, dropping her magical weapon. She curls up in a corner, saying their magic won't be able to break through that level of immunity shield. Trembling with fear, she asks the protagonist if they're really going to die. Ling keeps fighting and asks what is going on with her, since she's completely in shock. He starts getting irritated with the situation and yells that they're not going to die. He starts defeating multiple wolves one after another in seconds and shouts for her not to be afraid, because there's definitely a way, and he's right there and won't let anything happen to her. That scene she just witnessed starts to clear in her mind, and she remembers it happening once before. Someone was in front of her fighting a monster, and told her not to be afraid because he was there and wouldn't let anything happen to her. Vivian starts to wonder if this is really happening again. She also questions what she's doing since she had sworn never to hide behind others again. Her conscience starts pressuring her, asking if she's really going to stay there and watch him die once more. She grabs her weapon, trembling in fear, and looks at the protagonist fighting those beasts. She thinks that even if she's the one who dies this time, she'll never go back to being the one who just hides behind others. She starts running, screaming, and lands an extremely powerful blow on a wolf, slamming it into the ground. Ling is surprised and asks, "Is a mage really using physical attacks?" Vivian, still upset and with tears in her eyes, apologizes once more to the protagonist, pointing out that she didn't use anything special just now, and that for now, that's the only way she can fight. Ling tells her again that she doesn't need to apologize. In fact, it's thanks to her that he figured out a way to deal with that shield. Vivian is a bit confused because she didn't expect to hear something like that. Ling explains that he's going to use a fireball to open a path so she can escape the wolves' encirclement. He asks if she can hold on for 30 seconds alone. Confident, she says she'll try. Ling says that's enough and uses her instant fireball, creating an opening for her to pass through. Taking advantage of the fact that the rest of the wolves were focusing on Vivian, he jumps straight at the pup. He grabs onto the structure, thinking that since magical attacks will always be reflected, he'll use his own fist instead. It should work. The protagonist gathers all his strength and attacks. Suddenly, all the wolves begin to fall, and the system congratulates him, saying the rancher has defeated a boss-level monster and gained 10 experience points. Rewarded title: Wolf King, which can make wolves kneel before you and has 3 opportunities to summon and command a pack. The butler also congratulates him for learning a new skill on his own, 3rd-rank technique, Fire Fist. Reward: Beginner to Master Fire Magic Notebook X1. Ling is surprised and asks, there really was such a reward. Vivian approaches, saying they have to leave quickly because that portal seems to be the right one. The protagonist walks up to the portal and begins to extend his hand to test it. Vivian looks at him and realizes, now that she's calmed down, that his body is completely injured. After testing the portal, Ling says it feels the same as when they first entered, so it must be real. Without showing her face, she says that if she had been more useful, he wouldn't have gotten hurt like that. He scolds her, saying she's apologizing again. She tries to explain, but the protagonist interrupts, saying it's just a small injury and she doesn't need to worry. He takes her hand and, smiling, starts walking through the portal, adding that he truly wants to see the sky with her. The two of them begin to pass through the portal. The system congratulates them for completing the test, saying Vivian received a B while Ling got an A+. These results will be reported soon. Upon exiting the portal, Ling says something feels strange and questions why his body suddenly feels so relaxed and that all his wounds have vanished. The protagonist assumes the butler secretly helped heal him. However, it was only after reading the student manual that he found out. Nike was reading the book to him and says that although the pain feels real once someone leaves the test, they are completely unscathed. The protagonist lies on the table and asks why he didn't properly read the student manual before. Still, he gets up and says maybe it was a good thing because he truly fought for his life. If I hadn't, I might have been eaten by a wolf, and that would have been far more painful. Quickly, the story starts spreading around the school. One student asks his friends if they heard something strange because last night the talentless rookie completed the third-year student's test dimension. Another student is shocked and asks how that's possible. Freshmen aren't allowed in those places. The first guy says that's true, but people are saying it was a senior in charge of the test dimension, and the teachers are investigating to see what they find. The student yells, asking if that means Ling actually completed the test. The first guy confirms and emphasizes that he even got an A+. And after that incident, the teachers now suspect there was a mistake during the protagonist's entrance exam and are allowing him to retake the test. Inside the Truth Student Union, students are gathered around a magic crystal, waiting for the results to be revealed. They're shocked, asking if someone is messing with them, because in the second test, the protagonist's talent and fire affinity became mid-level. They start questioning how that's possible. Just a day ago, he was a weakling. Augustine sits on his couch drinking, annoyed by all the chatter around him, until he yells at them to stop and stop being so arrogant. He turns, irritated, grabs his coat, and says class is almost over, so they should get ready for patrol. While leaving, he says he'll find a chance to see for himself whether Ling is truly capable. Elsewhere, the protagonist looks around, wondering why he suddenly has a sinking feeling. The buyer trying to purchase his potions asks why he's backing away, saying if the offer is too low, they can renegotiate. Ling apologizes and says he just got lost in thought. Still, he offers to sell 15 potion bottles for 20,000 gold coins because the merchant seems honest. The merchant, without hesitation, agrees, saying that's a fair price since the potions are top quality. After the deal, the merchant says goodbye and tells the protagonist he's welcome anytime. They're willing to be the regular distributor of those potions if he's interested. Leaving with his pockets full of money, the protagonist smiles happily, saying he'll consider the offer. He holds his gold coin tightly and says that, judging by how things are going, it seems money won't be a problem for him anymore. He keeps walking, saying his little one has been waiting for a long time. So when I get back to the ranch, I'll build a new habitat for him. Later, back at the ranch, the habitat area has been expanded. Yiya is impressed with her new home and starts celebrating, saying her habitat has finally grown. Ling asks how she's doing and questions whether she really lied or not. She says she didn't lie and tells him that she loves him. Because of her bouncing and playing inside the small volcano, the lava nearly hits the protagonist, who steps back screaming and asks if that's her way of showing love. Yiya keeps relaxing inside her new volcano and says that was just a small accident. The butler congratulates him once more for upgrading the dragon's nest to medium size. With that, he gains 5 experience points, 200 gold, now totaling 27 out of 200 XP, and unlocks a new area, Dragon Training Field. The system asks if he wants to go there now. Ling is excited about the new training field, and Yiya asks if it's a new place to have fun. He calls her to take a look and snaps his fingers, asking the butler to teleport them there. While being teleported, the protagonist wonders what the new field will be like. It could be a dangerous flight path or an intense, merciless arena. Either way, he says, it must be much bigger than my tiny training room. But once they arrive, they realize it's nothing like that. He asks what could we possibly do on that platform. Yiya also gets annoyed, asking if the butler is joking with her. The system appears, asking them not to be impatient. Since the more tasks the protagonist completes, the bigger the training field will become. After completing all the tasks, he'll unlock the Dragon God Arena. Ling is enchanted by the name Dragon God Arena. Yiya asks what could that be. The butler asks him to complete the first training task, wave the interactive dragon wand 1,000 times. Upon hearing the sound and movement of the wand, Yiya becomes amazed and absolutely delighted. The protagonist throws the wand to the ground and asks if that's not for cats, wondering if the butler really thinks that changing the word cat to dragon means he's training a dragon. He keeps arguing with the butler, asking why he doesn't give a real task. Yiya, who is excited to play, starts looking at her owner and becomes extremely sad. She turns and says it's okay if he doesn't want to play. Instantly, he remembers being alone in his room asking when his father would play with him. Ling begins to wonder if the little one is feeling lonely. He figures she probably is, since she's the only dragon on that huge ranch. And he always shows up then disappears quickly. He starts questioning why he even cares. If there's a purpose to the butler's training, I should just think of it as playing with my little one. He starts waving the wand with the dragon, and the two begin to play happily. Quickly, his progress begins to rise. However, the protagonist's energy was also running low. He sits on the ground, asking when this will end, and whether the training is for him or for Yia. He gathers all his strength and starts waving it as fast and hard as he can. When he reaches 999, Yia looks at him with a different presence. He freezes, wondering what's happening because he can't move his body. Finally, the little dragon manages to grab the wand from his hand, completing the task. The butler appears once again, congratulating him for completing the training task. The fire dragon Yia has learned a new skill, Draconic Fear. Ling asks, how do you even learn that by trying to grab an interactive wand? The butler also informs him that the user's level has increased to 3rd rank, and now he can inherit the 3rd rank magic, Draconic Fear. Using the skill will paralyze any magical beast lower in level than the user, and has a small chance to paralyze one of a higher level. The greater the level difference, the longer the paralysis. He's amazed that he also inherited a new magic skill. Suddenly, several things begin to emerge from the sea. The butler says he's also unlocked the 2nd training task, but that day's training quota has been exhausted. The user is welcome to explore it next time. Ling looks toward the horizon and says he truly understands now. It's true that every time I complete a task, the training field will grow larger. The surface of the water is so vast that he wonders when he'll be able to unlock the Dragon God Arena. Yia calls out to the protagonist, and he says he already knows, promising they'll continue playing next time. He pets her and says that in the future he'll play with her more often. However, Yia gets annoyed and slaps him away, asking who gave him permission to touch her belly. The protagonist screams as he's sent flying, saying his affection was wasted. After that, a month passed without any problems. Professor Yisha kept her promise, and he was able to join the class. He finally came into contact with the mysteries of magic that were only taught orally. His classmates also became much friendlier, and the people who once mocked him now called him Hyung. The butler also stayed quiet for a long time and didn't give any more missions, making the protagonist think he could study peacefully until the end of the semester. But he didn't expect that. While helping Vivian clean the library, he would pull a curtain and say there seemed to be something behind it. As soon as he pulled it back, he saw a large magic circle. Immediately, he shouts that there's no mistake. He recognizes that magical aura as his father's. He reaches his hand toward the circle, and it begins to glow. He grows a bit concerned about what's happening and simply disappears. On the other side of the portal, he looks around in surprise and asks, "What the hell is that?" because he sees a chained dragon. However, upon closer inspection, he realizes it's not a dragon, but merely its remains. He begins to wonder why something like that exists in the academy, and why a matrix with his father's residual magic would lead him to a place like that. The butler appears and says the main quest for the water dragon egg, the sleeping dragon's last wish, is now active. The completion conditions are: break the chains restraining the dragon's skeleton and help the sleeping dragon move on. Quest difficulty, medium. Reward water dragon egg fragment X2. Current fragments 2 out of 10. Ling keeps looking and says, that's just a regular dragon's nest. Magic experience 50. He creates a flame in his hand and says he'll try it now. He attacks the chain, but nothing happens. He realizes he can't melt the chains. It won't be that easy. He understands that he'll need to figure out the material properties of the chain before trying anything. However, when he steps onto the sanctuary, another magic circle activates, and the dragon comes to life and begins to move. The protagonist is startled and asks if the dragon has become a ghost. The dragon quickly begins to attack him. He activates his shield to defend himself, but one strike shatters the shield effortlessly. The dragon's attack stops just inches from his neck, restrained by the chains. The protagonist watches and tries to get as far away as possible, saying, "Thank God the chains are limiting the creature's movements. However, that also means that if I break the chains, I'd be torn to pieces in seconds." The butler then tells him not to worry, as he would never do anything that would harm the user. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to hear a strange language saying, "Child, my child." At that moment, he realizes it's draconic language. The chained dragon keeps saying they must return his child. Ling starts looking at the skeleton, wondering if it's really the one speaking. He thinks he can understand draconic because of the butler. The skeleton keeps pleading for them to return his child. Ling asks the system if it's because the dragon had its bones and flesh stolen before dying, and if that's why it can't move on. The butler replies that this matter is outside the ranch's jurisdiction, and he must find out on his own. The protagonist gets gets irritated and throws the butler away, saying that every time he asks something, the answer is always the same, and questions how useless that can be. He thinks that if he can understand Draconic, it must mean the dragon can understand his words too. The dragon just keeps repeating that it wants its child. Ling asks why it's chained there and what happened to its child. He says that if the dragon can explain a bit better, maybe he can help somehow. However, the dragon just keeps repeating, "Return my child." The protagonist becomes a little disappointed and starts wondering if there's any way to communicate with it. He begins looking around for clues about what may have happened there until he spots a grimoire on a table. But the book has no title. He starts wiping it clean, wondering if it might contain any useful information. As soon as he opens it, some illusions appear in front of him. Oliver is telling Zoe to believe in him, because even if they weren't acknowledged by their peers in the modern age, their research would certainly go down in history. The protagonist starts shouting for his father and uncle. He keeps looking at the book, now realizing that the place might have been their lab. However, all the pages in the book are blank. Ling starts thinking that maybe the book that helped him awaken the Dragon Ranch was the result of that experiment. He thinks dragons are evil and should be killed. However, he wonders if his father let the dragon go because he didn't agree with humans experimenting on dragons. Ling starts to get confused. If that were the case, his father should be on the opposite side of his uncle. He remembers when he was a child and Oliver told him there was something different about his father's situation, and that when Ling became a sage-ranked mage, he would tell him how to clear the family's name. Ling starts questioning why his uncle wants to help him so much. Lost in thought, he hits his head, saying he can't think about that right now. He turns and begins to leave the room, saying that even if he finds an answer, it proves nothing, since that book is just an empty grimoire left there by someone unknown, and that's exactly why he won't find any new clues there. He begins to pass through the portal, saying he needs to investigate more outside. Because out there, I can definitely discover more things and complete this task. Shortly after, the protagonist calls Vivian and asks her to place her hand on the wall, asking if she feels anything. She looks at him and says she can feel the spider web he didn't clean properly. Later, Shua appears and tells the protagonist that he asked around, but there don't seem to be any legends about dragons inside the academy. Ling takes a deep breath and decides to talk to his professor. When he gets there a bit shy, he asks if there were ever any experiments related to dragons in that academy. Yisha looks at him and asks why he would think that. Dragons are such terrifying creatures. How could they be brought into an academy? Ling feels a bit confused as her expression upon hearing the question seemed suspicious. The professor continues talking and asks why, instead of being curious about something so unnecessary, he doesn't focus more on his studies. She says that, given his excellent performance in the 5th trial realm, the academy has arranged an extra test for him before the final exam. Ling asks what she means and if he really has to do something extra. She says yes and explains that if he manages to pass this extra test, he'll be able to skip 2 years of study and also gain qualification to enter the Mage Trials Tower. She explains that the trial realm he cleared was modeled after the Mage Trials Tower, which is the hardest trial realm in the academy. The protagonist is surprised by that. The Mage Trials Tower is the masterpiece of Chancellor Gladstone, the Academy's only sage-ranked mage. However, it contains more dangerous mechanisms, fiercer demonic beasts, and each floor becomes harder as one progresses. Only recognized students are allowed to enter the tower to test their limits. Those who perform well receive several special rewards, such as a Medal of Honor. Ling says he's heard about that medal before. The professor continues explaining and says that every time the trial tower is opened, the king of the Orandi Empire personally attends. The protagonist is surprised and asks if the king really shows up there. Yisha says yes, and that the Medal of Honor is personally awarded by the king. Students who receive the Medal of Honor have the same authority as teachers within the academy and can even study in the Imperial Library. She points out that this way, he'll be able to find information he can't access within the academy. Ling is shocked and wonders if Miss Yisha is actually giving him a hint, because the information not found in the academy might be exactly what he's looking for. Immediately, he gets excited and tells his professor that he'll take the extra test and asks if he can know more details. Yisha shouts that he must defeat her before the final exam. The protagonist looks at her, realizing she's a 6th-ranked mage. That makes him uncomfortable, and he starts thinking it must be some kind of joke. How could a 3rd-ranked student defeat a 6th-ranked professor? He keeps thinking the academy could have just told him directly that he's not allowed into the tower. Yisha steps closer and says that during the battle, she'll suppress her power to match his current level. He says she should have mentioned that earlier. Still, she touches his shoulder and explains there's half a month left before the extra test and says she's looking forward to seeing how he performs. The butler also appears, saying the water dragon egg quest has been activated. He must qualify to enter the Mage Trials Tower. Victory conditions: defeat third-ranked Professor Yisha without using draconic magic. Quest difficulty low. Rewards: 1 water dragon egg fragment and 30 magic experience points. Ling freezes, wondering how he's going to fight without using draconic magic. He starts thinking that a third-ranked versus another third-ranked might seem fair on the surface. But the professor's understanding and control of magic are far beyond what a beginner like him could achieve, especially a water-specialized professor whose magic would counter his fire. However, in magic, it's not just about attributes but also skills. So his only chance to win is to learn new skills before the extra test, skills that Professor Yisha won't anticipate. That way, I might be able to counter her water magic. The protagonist starts studying like crazy to learn more. Using the reward notebook from the butler, he keeps training non-stop and even recites new incantations like, "Spirit of fire resounding between heaven and earth, please hear me." But he begins to think that blindly studying won't be enough. He also starts sparring with Yia, but ends up getting hit and almost roasted alive. The little dragon laughs and asks if she's not amazing. The protagonist asks if she's trying to kill him. Still, he keeps training with her, thinking he needs more combat experience. Over time, he starts dodging Yia's attacks with more ease. He thinks that even though training and fighting every day is exhausting, he's felt a significant improvement in both his magic skills and his bond with Yia. In that brief moment, he begins to feel fulfilled and happy as he continues preparing for the extra test. As time passes, the day of the test finally arrives. The two are already in the arena, and many people begin gathering around. Some students comment that the protagonist only reached third rank half a semester ago and is already bold enough to fight Professor Yisha. People start whispering that no first-year student has ever had the chance to enter the Mage Trials Tower. So how is Ling, with only mid-level talent, going to be the first? They say he'd better lose quickly so that boring registration tasks can be finished and preparations for the trial tower can begin. Vivian gets irritated, saying that kids shouldn't say such things because student Ling is amazing. Shua is also annoyed and says that if the protagonist loses, he'll eat his own hat. The professor announces they're starting and explains that the first to be hit by magic or knocked out of the circle will be declared the loser. Both begin casting their spells and the battle begins. The protagonist uses the multiple fireball technique, while the professor uses the multiple waterball technique. With that, she completely nullified his attack. However, Ling thinks that his professor summoned twice as much as he did, which was already expected from a 6th-rank mage. Even though she suppressed her power, she's still extremely strong. Yisha scolds him, saying he shouldn't act so hastily since he hasn't learned wind magic yet. She then begins using the furious silver serpent dance. The protagonist thinks this is really bad and uses the Ring of Fire. With the Ring of Fire circling, he managed to interrupt her attack and save himself. The professor is impressed and asks if he really used the Ring of Fire to vaporize her water serpent. Shua shouts from the crowd, saying he's truly amazing. Ling thinks that attack came way too close. Yisha admits that the protagonist's understanding of formulas and skills is far beyond that of his peers. However, facing power that can't be overcome with tricks is what she wants to see if he can handle. She uses another attack called Third Rank Torrent. Ling immediately counters with Third Rank Fire Spring. The two attacks collide midair. People comment that Ling's Fire Spring is being pushed back and wonder what he was thinking, trying to go head-to-head with a much stronger professor using his own magic. Yisha tells him that clashing directly with her isn't a smart move, but he remains silent, staring at her. Suddenly, she's surprised, thinking there's no way he could have done that because the flames didn't rise up through her water column. She realizes it was the protagonist who controlled them to go up. The fireballs begin to gather around her, making her wonder if he's truly capable of controlling the fire element so skillfully. Ling smiles and says that thanks to her, he had time to prepare that spell. He begins casting his magic again, saying, "Oh, spirits of fire resounding between heaven and earth, please answer my call and let the meteor fire fall." Countless fireballs are immediately created and fired at the professor. Yisha starts thinking that Ling hasn't just become a third-rank mage, but also learned the art of meteor fire, which is nearly impossible for someone at his level. With that, she admits the protagonist has grown beyond her expectations. A massive explosion erupts in the arena. Vivian and the dog ask if Ling managed to win, but another student says there's no way that happened. How could the professor be defeated like that? As all the smoke begins to clear, the professor appears using a third-rank spell, Night Blossom Illusion. She surrounded herself in a ball of water, preventing all the flames from hitting her. Vivian was impressed by the teacher's strength. The other spectators comment that even fish are swimming in that water, highlighting that the illusion actually contains a real river. A student analyzing the fight says he heard that only those who have made a contract with the water spirit of a certain river can use that magic. Even though it looks like a shield, it's a small kind of teleportation. Besides teleporting the magic shot to the river, she also redirects the river back to the battlefield. The protagonist asks his opponent if that is really a third-rank spell. She tries to brush it off, saying she thinks she's still using third-rank power, but changes the subject and tells him to quickly think of a way to counterattack. As her spell is almost complete, and once it's ready, the entire arena will be swallowed by water. Ling is surprised and sees the water approaching him. He starts thinking that he just heard the spell can transfer magical attacks to the river. So if magical attacks aren't effective, it's basically the same as the White Wolf's shield. He starts wondering if it's only immune to magic. He begins to advance, thinking that if the fight has reached this point, then his last bet will be that. He gathers flames in his hand and goes for a physical attack, catching the teacher by surprise. She wonders how he figured out that method so quickly. With the physical attack, he manages to break through the water barrier she created and starts chanting his flame summon again, asking it to dance fiercely like a serpent. The attack goes toward the teacher, who responds with her waterfall magic. Her spell manages to contain his and hits him hard, slamming him against the wall, separating the arena from the stands. Vivian, beside him on the ground, asks the protagonist if he had just won. So why did that suddenly happen? Shua is confused, asking if their boss lost. However, the teacher intervenes and says that's not what happened. In fact, she was the one who was defeated, admitting she had to break the third-level restriction to defeat the protagonist. She explains that during their battle, she ended up unconsciously seeing him as a true opponent. She turns and starts leaving the arena, wondering aloud what kind of terrifying level he'll reach in the future, as she's truly looking forward to seeing it. Vivian and the dog begin celebrating, and the butler appears to congratulate him, saying that he defeated Yisha and thus completed the main task, gaining dragon egg fragments and magical experience. The king of the Orandi Empire, named Levi III, was also watching the match. The protagonist looks at him and realizes he really is there. The king begins to speak and says that everyone is about to enter the Tower of Challenges, as they are not only the elite of the Sacred Iris, but also the future pillars of the Empire. He emphasizes that the Medal of Honor will be awarded to the one who completes the Tower of Challenges first. He raises his hand and shouts for everyone to show what they're capable of. They begin organizing the students, asking them to form a single line to enter the magical tower. Some female students comment that they didn't think the protagonist would get permission to enter the challenge's magic tower, assuming the teacher must have gone easy on him. The same student who was analyzing the entire fight gets irritated by those comments and asks if the student union only knows how to gossip. He emphasizes that he was there as a witness during Ling's fight and that Ling won with his real skills. The girl also gets irritated and says maybe he too was bought off by the protagonist. They begin to argue, and other students ask them to calm down and not fight in front of the magic tower. Another girl at the end of the line observes and asks if the man at the front of the line is the protagonist. The same girl from before points her finger at him and says she doesn't know what he used to fool everyone. But his act will end, because the president of the student union already told everyone that he himself will test Ling's abilities. Seeing this, the protagonist starts thinking about Augustine, and the girl asks if he got scared. However, the protagonist was just thinking that he still has a task to complete, but doesn't know if he's ready to defeat Augustine. Suddenly, the butler appears and announces that the previous task of defeating Augustine in the Tower of Magical Challenges hasn't been completed, and advises the user not to start the next challenge. Ling is confused, asking why the previous task hasn't been completed, as he thought qualifying to enter the magic tower would be enough. However, this means there might be other tasks inside the tower. While he was lost in thought, one of the supervisors called out to him, saying he was the only one left except for the protagonist. He apologizes and begins entering the magic tower. The king announces that all students have entered, and the challenge must now begin. As soon as Ling crosses the portal, he's impressed and asks if that's really the Tower of Magic Challenge, because compared to the Kingdom of Challenges, this feels like an entirely different world. This is the first floor of the Magic Challenge Tower. He notes that it's truly a place meant for veterans in the top 10 strongest. He pulls out the map in his hand and says that, before entering, the teacher gave him a map since the tower has a total of 9 floors. Teleport points can be found on the map. On the first 3 floors, each teleport point is protected by magical beasts. Looking at the map, he notices there are many teleport points on the first floor. He starts moving, thinking that being killed by magical beasts or defeated by another student in a magical duel counts as elimination. He continues advancing as fast as he can since he doesn't know how strong the other students or beasts are, so it's better to run. His strategy is to distance himself from the largest group and head straight to the nearest teleport point. Along the way, he encounters a few magical beasts, but defeats them easily. The system congratulates him for defeating a third-rank magical beast, the Dark Knight Leopard. With that, he gains an experience point. He begins breathing heavily and says he finally reached the third floor rather quickly, but the beast level hasn't changed since the first floor. He steps into the teleport circle, saying that if his calculations are right, the next floor should have fourth-rank magical beasts. He notes that the higher up the tower, the fewer teleport points there are. That means that going forward, the chances of encountering others increase, so I'll need to be careful. He finally reaches the fourth floor, and someone hidden holding a magic potion says they finally found him. Meanwhile, outside, the king watches the Tower of Mage Judgment. Yisha also watches. She thinks that although His Majesty comes every year to watch the battle, what happens inside can't actually be seen from outside. The only thing they can do is observe student movement by the lanterns hanging outside the tower. Suddenly, the lantern on the fourth floor lights up, and she's surprised, thinking someone has already reached the fourth floor. The Judgment Tower is divided into 9 floors. The last 3 floors are mechanism rooms, where students face magical beasts from rank 7 to 9, far above their current level. The middle 3 floors are task phases. Only those who complete the tasks can advance. That's where half of the students will be eliminated. On the first 3 floors, students only need to defeat the beast guarding the teleport points to advance. Only a few are eliminated there. Teams betrayals fights over positions. In the end, only 10 people can pass. You could say the real challenge begins on the 4th floor. She begins to wonder how far the protagonist can actually go. Back on the 4th floor, a system screen appears for Ling saying, "Conditions to clear. Obtain 1,000 points before all the animals are killed. Point rules, each beast killed equals plus 200 points. Each student eliminated equals minus 1,000 points." The protagonist is shocked to learn that eliminating a student deducts so many points. It means there will hardly be any infighting at that level. There are a total of 1,000 beasts for 100 people, so each person can kill 10. But he keeps analyzing and realizes that's not all. The clear condition is exaggerated. Get 1,000 points before all the beasts are killed. So even if there's no visible infighting, the moment a student kills a beast, someone else will definitely not get enough points and be eliminated. Realizing this, he starts running, saying he needs to get ahead of everyone. However, the hidden person was just waiting for an opportunity, and as soon as the protagonist passes by, they throw the flask, saying he must be marked. But the protagonist notices it in time and uses a fireball to preempt the attack, destroying the flask midair. He's confused, thinking, eliminating students deducts points, so why am I being attacked? He looks at the person who attacked him, but realizes he has no time to waste on that and keeps moving forward. The attacker begins laughing and says he's finally been marked. 10 minutes earlier, Augustine and his team were gathered in a part of the 4th floor. He said that apparently the 4th floor wasn't suitable for fighting other students, so he'd have to wait until the 5th floor to confront the protagonist. One of the members grew irritated, saying he couldn't understand why their leader had to stoop to that level to compete with someone like that. If the leader had that much free time, then the 2 of us should fight instead. The young man shouted at the president, saying he was already in 4th place, and questioned whether he didn't already have the qualifications to challenge him. Augustine looked at him and said he was still too weak, but the student didn't give up, because his leader had promised him that if he got more points than Ling while on the 4th floor, then the 2 would duel once they reached the 5th floor. He started yelling that that's exactly why he won't let the protagonist get a single point. Meanwhile, Ling kept advancing until he finally spotted one of the magical beasts. He got ready to attack, saying this time he would beat the other students. However, before he could even launch a small attack, other students surrounded the magical beast and attacked it with everything they had. He grew frustrated, saying this had already happened more than 10 times. Every time I found a beast, someone else immediately attacked it, and I can't understand what kind of coincidence this is. Only 89 magical beasts remained, and he had 0 points. He kept moving forward, saying he was running out of time. Along the way, he heard some people laughing, saying the points were theirs again. One of the guys laughed, saying he had already gotten his 1,000 points. The other 2 were confused, saying they were also ordered to chase the protagonist, so they didn't understand how he was lucky enough to get 1,000 points. And if we keep wasting time chasing the protagonist, we won't earn enough points to pass either. Suddenly, Ling lunged at Alan, threw him to the ground, and asked what that comment meant about chasing him. The other two who were standing prepared to fight, asking if the protagonist was crazy for attacking their team alone. However, Ling looked back and smiled, saying veterans were more than welcome to attack him if they wanted to lose 1,000 points from their total score. The two decided to back down. Ling kept holding Alan and said that, on the other hand, he didn't care if Alan didn't want to talk. Either way, you won't earn enough points to pass, so we should fight each other to the death right here and now. Alan began to panic, saying he didn't want that, as he had just barely earned his points and didn't want to be eliminated. Terrified of being disqualified, he shouted that it was Saren who told them to do it. If we didn't, he'd break our bones once we left the tower. Ling was confused and asked who that person was, but they said they didn't know what the protagonist had done to offend him. They pointed out that Ling had been so focused on looking for magical beasts that he hadn't noticed the air, and that if he just lifted his head a bit, he'd see an arrow pointing directly at him, saying, "Ling is right here." The protagonist was surprised and said now it all made sense. That's why people were always ahead of me no matter where I went. Suddenly, he remembered the red powder and realized it was used in that earlier attack. He stood up, extremely angry with the situation, and Alan said the number of beasts had dropped too fast, asking if the protagonist still planned to keep going. Because even if we don't interfere anymore, others will keep tracking you, so it's too late to get 1,000 points. Ling tried to destroy the mark with a fireball, but it remained. Alan told him not to waste energy. Those markings can't be erased. Saren kept watching from afar, saying that as long as the mark remained, his lackeys would always be one step ahead of the protagonist, taking the magical beasts he could be getting. He emphasized that Ling wouldn't get a single point and should forget it, but then he was shocked by what he saw. Another arrow appeared and he wondered why there were two markings. Ling began moving fast, saying if they wanted to mark him, then fine. I can easily imitate hundreds of those marks to confuse them. He started using his fire ability to create countless other markings, leaving Saren unsure of what to do. Seeing no other choice, Saren began hunting magical beasts himself, since there were still 29 left. He pointed out that there were very few magical beasts remaining, and refused to believe the protagonist would manage to get his 1,000 points to pass. The other students start succeeding one after another. Ling keeps moving forward as only 8 magical beasts remain, and he has a total of 600 points. He says he's almost there and continues searching. I just need 2 more beasts. However, the system shows that only 1 beast remains, and this leaves him frozen. He punches a nearby rock in frustration because even if he defeats the last one, he still won't have enough points. But then he looks to the side and sees a new system window appear saying, since only 1 magical beast remains for the current floor's hunting task, the desperate attack effect has been activated. The student who defeats the last magical beast will receive a reward package. The package will randomly grant between 0 and 999 points when opened. Time limit to complete the task, 1 hour. Please participate actively in this hunting task if your points are insufficient to complete the current objective. Ling becomes extremely happy upon seeing that he still has a chance, and charges forward with everything he's got. Other students also keep searching for the beast, but none of them manage to find it as it hides very well. They comment that it was expected to be hard to find, but they don't care and decide to head to the central teleportation circle and rest a bit. Meanwhile, at the central teleportation circle, Augustine was already there with some of his team members. A woman asks the president if Saren isn't going too far this time, because if they use tactics like that against a first-year freshman, their council's credibility will be damaged. Augustine asks if she's seriously saying he went too far because the tower is a place that only allows the strong. If Ling can't even handle small fish like Saren, then he's not worth my time. The protagonist keeps advancing as fast as possible, but he notices there are only 15 minutes left, and at this rate he won't make it. He asks the butler to activate his Wolf King title, a skill earned after defeating the lesser white wolf during the 5th challenge. This skill allows the user to summon and command a pack of magical wolves. The protagonist gathers a pack around him and says their target is a 4th-class fire beast, and their mission is to find it for him. With that, he gives the order and the wolves charge ahead. The other students are startled, asking where so many wolves came from. Another one comments in surprise that those are summoned beasts. Alan observes the number of wolves, and says he doesn't know anyone in their class who can summon that many. Another student suggests maybe it's because time is almost up, so the tower itself released the wolves to give them a chance. Suddenly a howl is heard, and the students start running toward the sound, saying maybe they've found something. Seeing how fierce the race to get there is, the protagonist asks the butler to use the teleportation matrix item. Ling is teleported to a location and suddenly hears someone behind him, saying they're really impressed he's using such a valuable item there. And apparently you're not afraid to spend money during the challenge. Ling is surprised to see that someone got there before him. He turns around irritated, saying that person must be Saren. Ling asks if he's already defeated the last beast. Saren tells him not to be so scared because when the wolves howled for the protagonist, he just happened to be nearby. However, it seems the last magical beast is inside the volcano. The other students start arriving, saying they can't believe it and that's why no one could find it in time. Saren keeps mocking him, telling the protagonist to just give up and admit it. He may have conspired against Ling on this floor, but all is fair in war. He points out that this is actually a good lesson for Ling to witness firsthand the savagery of human nature. Ling asks if he really expects a thank you for that. Saren smiles and asks if he's not happy with the result. But then Ling jumps into the volcano, leaving him completely shocked. He asks what's going through the protagonist's head to do that, but Ling states that losing like this isn't fair and no one would be happy with that. A countdown appears saying there are only 2 minutes left. He dodges a strong flame heading his way and thinks that while he's inside the Tower of Challenge he won't die, even if seriously injured. He keeps pushing forward, breaking through anything in his way, thinking he wants to see how far he can go. But the temperature starts rising extremely fast, and the place becomes unbearably hot. He thinks that if he hadn't gained fire magic immunity from Yia, his lungs would probably already be completely dried out. Suddenly, something grabs him. He begins to get caught in a spider web, and no matter how hard he tries to break free, he realizes it's incredibly strong. A giant spider starts approaching, and he's shocked, realizing that the last magical beast, the one hiding inside the volcano, is that massive monster now standing right in front of him. He starts yelling that he's going to become that thing's next meal. Ling begins using his fire magic, saying he needs to burn those webs as fast as possible so he can fight. However, his fire magic does nothing. The monster keeps approaching and attacks, piercing both his legs, causing him to scream in pain. The system appears and states that this is a fourth-class creature, the fire spectral spider, a giant spider that lives in the crater of a volcano. Its golden silk is extremely resistant to heat sources. Not even flowing lava can burn it. It enjoys torturing its prey until they can no longer fight, then devours them slowly. Ling asks if the system couldn't have shared this extremely important info earlier. Suddenly, the spider attacks again, piercing his hand. He starts getting angry, thinking he can't afford to lose focus. He notes that even though he can't destroy the web and is immobilized, he can still cast magic. He begins casting a spell, but the spider attacks him 3 more times, stabbing his body again. Even in extreme pain and on the brink of defeat, he continues chanting with all his remaining strength. Several fireballs begin forming around them, hitting the spider with everything, but it hides inside its carapace, which makes the protagonist even angrier, asking if it really is such a coward that it'll just hide like that. He tries to free himself again, saying that if he weren't stuck in that damned web, he could use his fist to break that shell. Suddenly, he sees the remaining time is under a minute and panics, realizing he's running out of time. From this, he concludes that there's really no other way. He suddenly notices the spider's eyes are exposed. If he can see its eyes, that means the shell doesn't cover the entire body. So if he can use the fire serpent spell to penetrate its defenses, he might have a chance. With difficulty, he manages to free one hand and begins casting his spell, but then he feels a tremor and intense pressure, making him think the volcano is about to erupt. The spider shoots more webbing, covering the protagonist's mouth and preventing him from casting spells. The butler warns that flame spiders enjoy consuming prey that has been burned by magma from active volcanoes. Ling gets even more frustrated, asking if that's why the spider stayed there for so long, and questions again why the butler couldn't have warned him earlier. Because if the volcano hadn't erupted at that exact moment, maybe I could have won. The spider prepares to strike him as the volcano awakens, spewing magma everywhere. From afar, the student union is monitoring the situation. Saren starts laughing, saying he had already warned that a bastard like that couldn't be a rival to his master. He turns and says the president should come with him, since they have a duel on the next floor. However, Augustine asks if they really think they can leave, and reminds him that it's good he hasn't forgotten the current mission still isn't over. Saren comments that his master's tongue is sharp as ever, nodding that there are only a few seconds left, and questions whether the president really thinks the protagonist will survive that. The remaining time is just 30 seconds. Ling gathers all his strength and punches the spider in the jaw, shattering its fangs. The butler appears, congratulating the farmer for completing the special achievement, Baptism of Fire. Amid the flames and magma, the protagonist stands as if nothing affects him, thanks to the fire magic immunity effect. His own body was forced to endure the molten lava, now granting him physical resistance similar to the flame dragon Yia. From now on, this resistance will grow as Yia's level increases. Normal physical attacks can no longer injure him. Ling looks at his body and says it's truly amazing. Even my wounds healed instantly. He looks to the side and comments that apparently there's not much time left, as only 4 seconds remain. The spider tries to flee, but he stares it down and asks where it thinks it's going. He casts his magic again, summoning the fire serpent, and strikes the spider with full force, with only 1 second left on the timer. With that, the time runs out. Saren keeps laughing, saying it's over, and asks the president what he thinks of that, emphasizing that he had said the protagonist would be eliminated. Augustine turns away disappointed, as he truly believed that guy hadn't survived. Suddenly, people begin shouting for them to look at the sky. Something is moving. Augustine is stunned, thinking it might be him. He looks back and sees that the mark placed on Ling is moving rapidly toward them. That means he's still alive. Saren gets annoyed and asks why everyone is so shocked. Being alive means nothing. Even if he is, he'll still be disqualified if he wasn't able to defeat the last magical beast. Suddenly, the protagonist appears behind them, asking for permission to pass, saying he brought the reward orb in his hands. Saren can't believe what he's seeing. The others are amazed, asking how he managed that and how many points it's worth, telling him to open it right away. He says he will, but first asks if any kind soul would lend him some clothes. A girl hands him some clothes, and the protagonist thanks her. She says it's no trouble at all, pointing out that her miniaturization potions are incredible. Besides school uniforms, I can carry all sorts of things. She walks up to him and says, to be honest, she's been tracking his progress since he entered the tower, as rumors are spreading that he's a rising genius. A genius being compared to Augustine. She smiles, introduces herself as Daya, and asks if he'd like to form a team with her on the next floor if he passes. Ling feels a bit confused, thinking the situation is strange since that girl is his senior. However, her smile is strikingly similar to Vivian's, and he wonders if it's just because they're both beautiful. Alan then comes running, saying the protagonist can count on him too, since the next floor has 5th-rank magical beasts, and they won't be able to handle them alone. He adds that on the current floor, he was tricked by evildoers and end up unintentionally getting in the protagonist's way, so now he's willing to lick his boots to make up for it on the next floor. Ling starts pushing him away, asking him to back off a bit, but Alan clings tightly, saying he won't let go even if he dies. I'll hold on forever. Daya is impressed by his determination. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Thank you.